On the day when the group encountered destructive magic, the protagonist fell into a deep sleep, leaving his companions. The brown-haired man had a deadpan expression on his face, while the red-haired girl gritted her teeth. A girl with blonde hair is crying. The protagonist is in an ice block. The white-haired girl is half covered by a shadow. 300 years have passed since then. Sunlight illuminates the city. However, the restored peace and calm everyday life were only an illusion, and now the whole world is shrouded in darkness. There is a blue sky in the background of a tower with a green spire. A man with black hair, a guy with brown hair, and a girl with pink hair walk against the backdrop of sunlight. A man in green clothes walks deeper into the forest, leaving behind a man lying on the ground. The main character clenched his hand into a fist and clenched his teeth. He has black hair and red eyes, and a bead of sweat runs down his cheek. A huge monster with 2 large front teeth swings its arms. The protagonist is sitting right in front of him. Someone is knocking. A brown-haired guy stands in the room with a book in his hands. He looks towards the entrance and there is a silhouette of a girl standing there. The main character thought that when he turned 13 years old, one hero came to the magic tower for him. A white-haired girl with yellow eyes with a smile on her face says that she heard that once every 100 years a brilliant magician appears, and then asks the protagonist if he is him. Archmage Rin closes the book and looks at the girl with an imperturbable gaze. The girl looks at the protagonist, who puts the book back in its place. The main character sat down and sorted through books. A girl with a misunderstanding on her face turns to the protagonist. She puts her hands behind her back and asks the main character if he can hear her. The main character says that he is not a genius or a child. His name is Rin. The girl looks at the protagonist with confusion on her face. Her cheeks turn red and she smiles. The girl approaches the protagonist and asks if he is really the same young 4-star Archmage in the history of the Empire, Rin. She adds that she seems to have come to the right place. She clenches her hand into a fist and tells the protagonist that he is still a child. She laughs and says that it's hard to call the protagonist a genius magician when he still needs to change diapers. She adds that if the main character joins their party, she will change them for him every day. The main character has a dissatisfied expression on his face. He concentrates a fireball in his hand. The girl with a scared look on her face tells the protagonist to wait, because she was joking. She opens her eyes wide and screams that it was a joke. She holds her head, and the books on the bookshelf wobble. A lot of books fall down. The main character removes the fireball. He sees the girl's head sticking out of a mountain of books. Another book falls on her head and bounces off. A drop of sweat runs down the main character's cheek. He smiles and his cheeks are red. The girl with a smile on her face exclaims that now the protagonist is smiling. The protagonist thought that it was then that he became interested in her. The girl puts her hand forward. The main character looks away. The white-haired girl smiles with her eyes closed. They shake hands and the girl introduces herself as Lista Alter Skirpin. She adds that she is a fake warrior of the Heavenly Dragon of Light Church. Note, a fake warrior is a hero who has improved his body with various modifications, but because of this he does not have long to live. The protagonist thought that she asked him to help her defeat the abyss spreading from the South Pole, or in other words, she invited him to a group of heroes that already included 2 people. Lista, with a smile on her face, tells something to the protagonist, who is sitting on the books. Among these 2 people were the famous archer of the Kai's Empire, whose hair was tied in a ponytail, as well as the fire dragon priestess of the Dragoon Republic, Pride. The main character says that he doesn't want to die, and the white-haired girl asks who wants to die. The main character asks the girl if the other 2 are as interesting as she is. Lista has a surprised expression on her face. She rests her chin and makes a thoughtful expression on her face. She reports that they are just as crazy as she is, but there is something more interesting. The main character listens to her with a calm look and asks what it is. The white-haired girl smiles. He raises his finger up and replies that this is peace. The blue lights glow brightly. The main character thought that this word caused a strange resonance for him. A man who studied magic in the tower after being rescued from the slums. He had a goal, to become the highest-ranking magician in the Empire, a 7-star magician. Rin sits at the table and reads a book. He thought that they say that if you reach the 7th star, you will be able to see the truth of the world. He wanted to reach the dimension where no one had gone before. The main character looks at a flying feather. He thought that living here, reading books about magic for the rest of his life, would be nice. But in order to reach the 7th star, he needed to know about the world outside the magic tower. The pen falls on an open book. The main character picks up his pen and thought that, however, aimless travel seemed too tiring to him. He looks out the window behind which a bird is flying against the background of a blue sky with clouds and wonders if he needs this. He adds that this clumsy hero appeared and offered him to save the world. The white-haired girl smiles and points her thumb at herself. The protagonist thought that this unexpected offer was enough to pull him out into the outside world. The main character closes his eyes with a smile on his face. He thought that despite the fact that he did not have a burning sense of justice to save the world, he accepted her offer. The protagonist places his hand on the table. The main character, with a staff in one hand and a hat in the other, goes after Lista. The green-haired archer drinks from a mug, and the main character with a mug in his hand looks at him with misunderstanding. The protagonist thought that Kai's was an archer whose accuracy dropped catastrophically without drinking, and he was mute. Kai's looks into his mug. A stream of black smoke rushes towards the protagonist. Freed, the priestess, was a heavy smoker. As a fire dragon priestess, he should at least be able to cast a breath spell, she said, exhaling black smoke in the protagonist's face and letting out a crazy laugh. The red-haired girl smiles with a pipe in her hand. The protagonist, with a dissatisfied expression on his face, pushes away the black smoke with his hand. Lista smiles happily and holds a mug in both hands. A huge one-eyed monster with horns appears behind her, screaming very loudly. The white-haired girl is scared. Kai's and Pride sit with deadpan expressions. The protagonist is scared, and Lista smiles. However, they were both masters of their craft. Pride smiles smugly, while Kai's has a stern look. An arrow glowing green hits the monster's eye. The red-haired girl creates a ball of golden magical energy. A powerful beam rushes towards the one-eyed monster. Their group was strong. Those terrible monsters they encountered on their way, and the monsters of the abyss approaching the north, were too much for them. An archer shoots a green arrow from his bow. A red-haired girl with a malicious smile concentrates fire in her hand. The main character puts his hand forward and creates a golden magic ball. Lista slashes with a sword shrouded in blue energy. Lista often joked with the protagonist. The white-haired girl cuts the head of the horned monster and points her finger at the protagonist, and then tells him not to fall in love with her. The main character averts his pupils to the side. The red-haired girl and the archer drink drinks from wooden mugs, while the protagonist and Lista eat. The white-haired girl asks the protagonist if he would like to go on a trip with her when all this is over. The protagonist remembers how the white-haired girl told him that she was very afraid that he was so innocent that another girl would deceive him. The archer watches as the red-haired girl kicks the bat-like monster. Lista rests his chin on his hand with a tired expression on his face, and the protagonist holds his little finger to his ear with a dissatisfied expression on his face. The main character looks at the white-haired girl and smiles. The white-haired girl has a surprised expression on her face, her cheeks turning red. Kai smiles a little with his eyes closed. Pride blows gray smoke out of his mouth with a satisfied expression. 5 years have passed. The group walks towards the sunset. When their journey to save the world from the abyss came to an end, the protagonist's body began to show signs of erosion. Lista cries looking at the protagonist. This was the result of the protagonist being attacked by enemies for 5 years. Rin lies on the ground with blood pouring from his mouth. Before the final battle with the abyss, the protagonist dies, consumed by a poison that poisons the soul. Lista holds the protagonist's hand. The white-haired girl, Pride, and Kai's are gathered near the protagonist, who is lying on the ground. The main character thought that his life would soon end. The archer's eyes are covered by a shadow. The white-haired girl asks Rin to wake up. She asks Pride to do something. The red-haired girl with a desperate expression on her face says that she cannot break this curse. She adds that it cannot be healed. Lista cries with a shocked expression and then screams that no, Rin can't die. The main character, with a fading expression on his face, says that he does not want to die. The white-haired girl shouts that she will find a way, but the protagonist just needs to hold on. The protagonist's eyes look lifeless. He lifts his head and grabs his shirt. He says not to worry too much because he did it. The rest of the group looks at the protagonist. The main character lifts his shirt and reveals the purple seal that is on his chest. Overlord's tiny filter lapel, an immortality spell carved into the protagonist's heart. The seal begins to glow. This is magic that will put the protagonist's body into a sleeping state and heal him. The main character coughs. He didn't know how long it would take to revive, but it was the only option left. The protagonist's leg is covered in ice. Lista watches as the main character becomes increasingly enveloped in ice. The main character grabs the clothes of a white-haired girl. He says he will return. Tears roll down Lista's cheeks. The main character smiles and then asks the girl to win. The white-haired girl has a surprised expression on her face. She smiles a little and says that she promises, and then offers to meet again at all costs. Lista squeezes the protagonist's hand and asks him if he promises that he will return. Half of the protagonist's body is covered in ice, with a fading expression on his face. He says that then the four of them will go to see the world together. Kais closes his eyes. Pride closes his eyes and begins to cry. Lista holds the protagonist's palm with both hands and smiles with tears on her cheeks. She reports that she will be next to the protagonist until he wakes up. The main character closes his eyes and smiles, and then says that he promises. Ice completely covers the protagonist. His consciousness was drawn into the cold grip of death and a feeling of buoyancy and emptiness, like diving into a swamp. Waves float across the dark blue water. The main character drowns head down. He wonders if he was unable to see the truth from the seventh star's magic system. Lista slashes and a blue wave of energy emanates from her sword. The main character closes his eyes. Kais shoots a bow and emits powerful green energy. The main character raises his hand. Pride jumps back and releases a stream of fire underneath him. The main character reaches his hand up. The rest of the protagonist's party fights with angry expressions on their faces. The red-haired girl releases fire from her hands. The white-haired girl makes a downward strike with her sword. The archer jumped back and fired his bow. This shared journey across the vast world ends here. Many monsters stand in front of Kais, Lista and Pride. In front of the army of the abyss rushing forward with screams, all that appeared before him was darkness, darkness, darkness. The protagonist reaches out to the members of his group. The main character's eye is closed. He opens his eye, which has a red pupil. A red-haired girl with her hair tied in a ponytail and yellow eyes puts her hand on the shoulder of a black-haired boy with red eyes, and then asks if he is okay, calling him by name Ryan. The main character turns to the girl and calls her mom. He looks at her with wide eyes. The protagonist wonders if he really has a mother and is not an orphan. A bead of sweat runs down the red-haired girl's face. Bright sunlight blinds the protagonist. There is a bright sun in the sky. The main character looks to the left with a worried expression on his face. He turns his head to the right. He stands among many people and wonders where he is. The protagonist's mother asks him why he behaves this way, and then informs him that this is the hero's square in front of the Vatican. The main character, with a surprised look, suggests that there is a monument here in honor of the group Lista. The shadow of the hair covers the protagonist's eyes. The main character looks at the monument. In front of the protagonist there is a monument depicting Kais, Lista, the protagonist himself and Pride. Below the sculptures is a plaque that lists the years of life. Lista lived from 1082 to 1116. Rin lived from 1090 to 1107. Kais from 1076 to 1154. And Pride from 1079 to 1168. The protagonist silently looks at the plaque. He asks his mother what year it is. The girl crosses her arms and asks the protagonist what's wrong. The main character asks what year it is now. The protagonist's mother closes her eyes and says that it is now 1418 according to their calendar. The main character made a shocked expression on his face. He clenches his hands into fists and wonders if he was reborn or if his memory was superimposed on someone else's body. He notices that the sensations in this body are strange, and then asks what happened. He remembers Lista's laughter, Kais's drunken delirium, Pride's cigarette smoke. The protagonist opened his eyes wide and thought that these days were really 300 years ago. Beads of sweat run down his face. He asks if they won the last battle, and then thought that it was a pointless question. Sunlight filters through the sculptures. The protagonist thought that if they had won, they would have erected a monument to them, which is why the sky is so peaceful now. The protagonist's mother rests her hand on her cheek and asks the protagonist why he says such obvious things. She reports that they say that if you climb the Vatican Tower now, you can see the frozen remains of Lord Rin. The main character, with a lowered gaze, replies that he understands. He wonders if this means he has taken over someone's body. Sunlight illuminates the building. The protagonist's mother says that Lady Lista stayed by Lord Rin's side until she passed away. He says that it is so beautiful and so sad, and then asks the protagonist what he thinks. The red-haired girl looks at the protagonist. The main character laughed. Mom asks the main character why he is laughing, because this is a sad story. The protagonist looks at his hand. He has a sad expression on his face. He remembers how the white-haired girl held his hand before her death. He says it's surprising that she kept her promise. The red-haired girl calls the protagonist by name. The main character approaches the sign. He reaches out to the sign and says that someone still didn't keep his promise. He lowers his hand a little. The main character cries and says that he couldn't hold it back. A tear falls to the ground. The main character reads the book and says that he doesn't know what the two said about him, but he has become a historical figure. He thought that the emperor personally erected a monument to him, and many Mago towers and Mago families revered him as a saint. The protagonist's mother, with a cup of tea in her hand, looks at the protagonist with a worried expression on her face. The main character turns over the pages of the book and thinks about what the past 300 years have left him. He thought that all he had left was magic, memories of traveling to many places. A huge worm monster runs after the group members. There is a red bird on the head of the main character. The group is surrounded by many yellow birds. The main character thought that the faces of his comrades, who smiled brightly in these memories, became legends, not memories. The protagonist opens a book showing a worm monster and a red bird. He remembers sitting next to Lista and thinking that she once said that moments only become memories when they are shared with someone, so his memories are not memories yet. Kai's, with a bag behind his back, places his palm on the protagonist's head. Pride smokes, and Lista looks at the protagonist and the archer with a smile on her face. The protagonist thought that until he died and met them, they would remain undivided. The main character looks at the book and thought that these memories, with which he must live alone, are like an unanswered echo. The protagonist's mother brings him a cup of tea on a saucer. She hands the saucer to her son. The main character, with a smile on his face, extends his hand to the cup. He thought that now his comrades were gone, but they left this world. The protagonist takes a saucer with a cup. There is smoke coming from the tea. The main character wonders what he should do now. He looks at the cup of tea. He remembers Lista. The main character opens his eyes wide. He thought that there was still something to work on. The Holy People Empire divided the magician class into 7 levels. A bright light emanates from the head of a man in a blue robe and with a staff in his hand. 1-star normal mage, Bendorian. 2-star average mage, Limites. 3-star high mage, Atlas. 4-star elite mage, Glottos. 5-star grand mage, Aquazad. 6-star sage, Rampage. 7-star sage, Shinseiji. The main character has reached the level of a 5-star magician. Only 2 people in the entire history of the Empire have reached the 6-star level, known as a sage. The image of the protagonist holds a staff in one hand, and in the other he concentrates fire. The protagonist's mother calls him over with a bag in her hand. The main character thought that if he had not left Lista, he probably would have reached the 6-star level, then grew old and died, but he would have regretted it all his life. He remembers how the white-haired girl put her hand forward to shake hands. The main character is standing by a bookshelf. He thought that even if someone could turn back time, he would leave to travel with her again and again, but now Lista is no more. The main character goes with Lista. The white-haired girl smiles sincerely. The protagonist thought that he hoped this world was filled with laughter. The protagonist follows his mother and thought that these were the words of Lista. He wondered if the world they desperately defended was truly what she wanted it to be. He adds that those who reach the end of magic, that is, truth, can see the true face of the world. So in this life he must become a 7-star magician. The protagonist stops and clenches his hands into fists. He looks at the statue with a group of heroes and thought that in order to escape from this sadness and emptiness, he will try. Lista, with flushed cheeks and a joyful expression on her face, beckons Rin to look at the flower. Pride, with a pipe in his hand, says that showing this to a charmless brat like Rin looks too romantic. Kai stands silently. The main character shouts that he would rather read another magic book than look at this, and then asks what is so wonderful about this flower field. The people in the Lista group were equally full of quirks, but the protagonist really enjoyed traveling with them. The white-haired girl takes the protagonist's hand, while the rest of the group watches them. The main character names the partners from his past life and says goodbye to them. The dead remain in the past and cannot be together, but the living, following the flow of time, must move into the future. The main character walks through the city. He walks against the backdrop of houses with lights burning in the windows. Thus began his second life. A maid with black hair bows to the protagonist who has just woken up and says that since he is awake, she will prepare breakfast. The main character stretches and trembles. He goes somewhere in slippers. He looks at himself in the mirror. He walks down the corridor and thought that the memories of his old life returned to this 9-year-old spoiled boy just 20 days ago. This boy, Ryan, is the eldest son of the Ludwig family, one of the 5 great mage families of the Empire. He, an orphan, was reborn into a noble family and therefore had to work tirelessly to adapt to this life. Sunlight illuminates the mansion. The protagonist walks near the window. The protagonist enters a room where a maid greets the protagonist. The main character's mother looks at him and notices that he has already woken up. She tells the protagonist that he is just in time, and then asks him if he could go tell his father that breakfast is ready, and then adds that he will be glad that he comes. The main character, with a smile on his face, agrees with his mother. The main character enters the room of his father, who is sitting at the table with a book. Kevin Ludwig, due to the fact that the protagonist has a bad complexion, asks him if he didn't get enough sleep. He puts his hand on the protagonist's head and tells him that he still looks tired from the trip. The main character tells his father that breakfast is ready. Kevin laughs and with a smile on his face tells his son that he came here just for this, and then thanks the protagonist and says that he needs to eat first. The main character asks his father if he really won't have breakfast. The father looks away. The main character sees a piece of paper with hieroglyphs and asks if it is magic. The father says yes, and then says that there is a dissertation presentation next week, so he is in a bit of a hurry. He says food makes him feel foggy, so he tries to concentrate and get as much done as possible in the clear morning hours. The main character lowered his gaze. He looked closely at the paper and wondered if his father was really stuck on this. The main character offers his father help. Kevin asks his son if he really wants to support him. The main character says no, he wants to help solve the magic circle. The father, with a smile on his face, tells the protagonist that help is welcome, but if he is late for breakfast, his mother will scold him and therefore he better go have breakfast. The main character takes a pen from the table. The main character begins to write and says that magic is the numerical expression of natural laws with their subsequent distortion. Kevin has a surprised expression on his face. The main character writes and says that the Gu rune complicates the equation and conflicts with the Cha rune, so it is better to replace it with the Gu rune. The main character puts his hand on a piece of paper and says that then, using the imperial equation 41-2, you can immediately get the answer. The protagonist's father takes a piece of paper and asks if such a method is possible. The protagonist thought that this was a complex problem that even the best scientists in the Empire could not solve, and this was a high-level spell that was about 200 years old. A wizard in a hat holds a staff in his right hand. Kevin asks the protagonist how he was able to do this. He thought that if this spell was restored, it could protect many people from natural disasters such as floods or landslides. He wonders how Ryan, who had just mastered basic magic, was able to do this. He thought that based on his knowledge of basic magic, Ryan was an unusual person, but considering that he belonged to the line of magicians of the Ludwig family, this meant that he did not inherit the talent for magic. The father holds a book in his hands and thinks about his son and his wife. Half of his head is covered by a shadow. The main character asks his father if he can now have breakfast with them. The father of the family is surprised by the boy's words. His facial expression changes to a smile. He puts his arm around his son and says, "Yeah, let's eat together." The main character sits on a chair and leafs through a book. He thought that the Ryan family was small, a mother, father, and 6-year-old sister. The sister looks out from behind the door and watches the protagonist. The little girl's name is Sari. With shimmering black hair like silk and red eyes, she was a sweet girl who inherited the physical traits of the Ludwig family, just like Ryan. The main character turns back. The protagonist's younger sister is scared. She quickly leaves. The main character exhales and thought that this was quite understandable. He thought that in Ryan's memories, he was never kind to Sari, and instead of being cold, he was simply indifferent to everything. The main character imagines Ryan standing in front of the mansion. He silently reads a book. He remembers how Lista told the protagonist that he should take care of them, how she asked him how he could just run away, and how she asked if the protagonist felt that in this world it seemed like everyone was always busy. The main character stopped reading. He closes the book and with a dissatisfied expression on his face, he remembered how the white-haired girl called him a kind child and told him that he would succeed. The main character tells his sister to come to him and adds that he will teach her magic. Sari peeks around the corner with disbelief on her face. The main character asks the girl with a disgruntled look on his face, "Or do you want to play together?" The main character sees his sister leaving. The main character sighs and thought that children are too difficult to deal with. The main character turns around and sees his sister approaching him. Sari brought a red book called Basic Formulas for 1-Star Magic. The main character takes the book and asks her if she is reading such a book at the age of 6. The sister looks at the protagonist with reddened cheeks. The main character looks at his sister. He remembers how Lista sat in front of a flower and asked the protagonist if he knew the meaning of the name of this flower. In the background, Kais fights off insects with his hand while Pride burns them with fire from his mouth. Rin always complained about Lista treating him like a child, but he actually loved those moments more than anything. 2 pink butterflies fly against the background of light. The main character asks his sister which part she doesn't understand, and the girl shows the protagonist the necessary lines. The main character tells the girl what it means she didn't understand this from the very beginning, and then tells her that he will explain. He asks his sister if he has ever played house, and the girl answers yes. The main character gives the example of a thatched house and a brick house, and then says that depending on what kind of house you build, the materials change. The main character, with a bored expression on his face, says that in magic this role is played by a magical figure. The shape of the magic figure determines the magic attribute. He imagines a triangle and a fan-shaped figure. The protagonist says that if you draw a triangle, it will be the attribute of fire. The shape of a fan is the attribute of wind. So this magic figure is intended for magic with the attribute of wind. The main character tells his enthusiastic sister that the next step is runes, and they determine the effect of magic. The protagonist thought that runes are magic words. Yul means to bind, and Ho means to dispel. He imagines fire and thought that, for example, if he engraved the Yul rune on a triangular magic figure, it would turn it into a fire attribute binding spell. The main character says that in fact, mathematical formulas are used for this. The sister misspells the word mathematics, and the protagonist corrects her. Sari asks the protagonist what mathematics is. The main character averts his pupils with a dissatisfied expression on his face. The younger sister has a confused expression on her face. The main character says that for Yul you need a quadratic equation, and then he says that you need to come back even earlier, and should start with addition and subtraction. The maid holds a document in her hands and tells the man in blue that Master Rein has completely changed. The guy in blue asks if it's true, and then says that before, even when Lady Sari cried, he didn't care. The protagonist's mother and father watch their son and daughter with joyful expressions on their faces. The main character fell asleep on a chair, and his sister fell asleep on his lap. The protagonist's mother tells her husband that she wants to capture this scene in a painting. Kevin replies that he agrees. But by the time the artist arrives, the children may already wake up. The father places his hand on the table next to the protagonist and says that besides, Sari is so shy that this might be too much. The protagonist's father looks at the red book and a piece of paper with magical figures depicted, and then says that their son is teaching Sari magic. He looks at his wife and says that after returning from the square, Rein seems like a completely different person. The red-haired girl replies that his tone has suddenly become more mature. She asks Kevin if it is possible that the abyss has entered him. The father of the family replies that this is not so. He adds that the son is very similar to his father because he had a similar experience. He says that when he was a student, he had the honor of meeting Lord Rin. He holds a piece of paper in front of him with a smile on his face and says that at that time he boasted that he had become a 3D mage. But during the war, Lord Rin rose to 5 stars. He adds that living in the peaceful era that the heroes created made him realize how complacent he was, and it's possible that Rein had similar thoughts. A bright light illuminates the crying protagonist. The red-haired girl asks her husband if Lord Rin was really frozen in time. Kevin replies that yes, because he mastered ice magic so well that he remained the same as he was at 18 years old. His wife asks him to tell him more. The husband with a smile on his face says that even if he wanted to, he can't, because he doesn't know anything more than that. Kevin looks out the window. He props up his chin and says that Lady Lista's magic was in the ice, and the red-haired girl asks if it's true. The husband says that only Lord Rin and Lady Lista could awaken her. He adds that he suspects that this is a letter. Lista is standing in front of the city and thought that she would leave this letter for the protagonist, because he will definitely return someday. She adds that this letter is for the protagonist, who will come here from afar. Kevin tells his wife that he wants to tell her something. Rein seems like a genius. He says that what's more, he may well reach the level of a sage, because he solved the magic square that he had been struggling with for over a year just by looking at it this morning. Blue and purple energy shines brightly. The red-haired girl asks her husband if that's why he was able to come to breakfast today, and the husband replies that this really was the case. Kevin, with a smile on his face, says that it may be too early, but it's time to teach him their family magic. He reports that Rein can become a thief magician who reads and steals any magic. A man in a black robe holds a staff in his hand, and behind him is a magical pentagon. The father says that this is only allowed to those who belong to the Ludwig family, because this is magic available only to their family. A man in a dark robe has burning eyes. Kevin says he's not sure how well he can teach his son. The red-haired girl asks if it is really that difficult, and the father answers that it is. The wife says that this is an unusual task and asks her husband how he can cope. The father, with a satisfied expression on his face, says that he has an idea. Under a blue sky, a dazzling field of tulips stretches towards the horizon. This is just Tulika, a third of whose lands belong to the Ludwig family. There is a mill in the middle of a field of tulips. The main character lies on the grass. The main character holds a grass sprout in his mouth. He looks at the sky and says that the weather is, of course, amazing. The main character sits down and says that if you want to develop, then you need to set medium and long-term goals, especially if this is the path to the truth. He says that to become a 7-star magician, you need to do a lot, and no matter how young you are, there is no time to waste. The main character puts a sheet of paper on the ground and says that we must first call the guide. Sari appears behind the protagonist and asks him what he is doing. The main character says that this is so annoying, and his sister looks at the guy with misunderstanding on her face. The main character sighs and says that he was going to call a magic guide. My sister asks what a guide is. The main character offers to make a guide for her too, after which the sister's face becomes surprised. Sari raises her fists in the air with a joyful expression on her face. She spins around her axis with joy. The main character with his eyes closed thought that she seemed to like it, but for a 6-year-old child her speech was a little awkward, and then asked if something was wrong. The main character writes something on a piece of paper and says that the shape of the magic circle is a polygon, and the runes for the inscription are Ju, Yu, Du and Ji. He looks at his sister and tells her that this is high-level magic containing 4 different elements, so only a 4-star mage can handle it, and now only 10 mages in this country can use it. The main character touches a piece of paper with a pencil and blue crackling energy emanates from it. A huge stream of blue energy comes from the table. Blood pours from the protagonist's nose. He holds his chest as his sister looks at him with a worried expression on her face. Drops of sweat run down the protagonist's face. He asks if that's still too much for 4-star magic. He thought it was good that it was a guide spell, because if it was battle magic, he would have died. Blood pours from the protagonist's eye. The energy disappears, and the protagonist says that his body is garbage. The main character wipes his face with a handkerchief and then tells Rudian to come here. The sister looks at something in surprise. A blue butterfly materializes in front of them. The butterfly lands on Sari's hand. This butterfly on the sister's hand evaluates the user's abilities and determines potential magical power. The chief with a handkerchief over his mouth tells his sister that this is Rudian's function. He will tell her what to study and practice. He points his finger at the butterfly and says that the Ju rune and the Gaida spell communicates basic magical power, and the Yu rune reports the use of magic. The main character crossed his arms with a smile on his face and said that in a word, the best runes for learning are collected here. He adds that it may seem simple, but it is 4-star magic. Sari looks at the butterfly with a smile on her face, and the main character asks her if she likes it. The sister turns to the protagonist and answers yes. The sister leaves, and the protagonist tells her to go and study. The main character is staggering with a sick face. He holds his head and says that he needs to restore his magical power first, so he will summon the second Rudian later. Physical condition assessment. Magic power 3024. The main character thought that this was below the level of a novice magician, and then asked to show the calculation of endurance magic. The magic calculation value is 77, and the stamina is 64. The main character, with a serious expression on his face, thought that there was a long way to go. According to information from the guide, a pedigree of magic has been discovered and is assessed as teachable. Belsidious, Belcurious. The main character took a closer look at this information and thought that this was the magic of the Ludwig family. The main character props his chin and says that this body was not complete trash. When the protagonist was traveling with Lista, a young magician came to him. A man in a brown raincoat and a cylinder hat says something to a group of heroes. He wanted to show himself as the best magician of all the magicians in the empire. The magician releases a fireball from his hands. He wanted to join the group instead of the main character. The protagonist fights off the fireball with a green magic circle. There was nothing special about this mage's skills. The protagonist puts his hand forward and a huge beam of golden-orange energy rushes towards the magician. The main character looks at the magician in the hat with an indifferent expression on his face. He sees the defeated magician and thought that yes, there was nothing special about his skills. A bright golden glow appears brightly in the eye of the magician wearing the hat. His eyes did not give the protagonist peace. He looks at the magician's eyes in surprise. The magician in the hat puts his hand forward and a huge orange golden beam rushes towards the protagonist. The main character defends himself with blue energy. He thought that with these eyes he saw all the magic that the protagonist used. The rest of the protagonist's members watched the situation with surprise on their faces. The main character, with a serious expression on his face, puts his staff forward and creates 2 blue magic circles. The magician in the hat puts his staff forward and creates a magic triangle. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek. He thought that his opponent was only counterattacking. Blue and orange golden energy clashed. The main character with a thoughtful look says that he now understands that it was the power of the bloodline magic of the Ludwig family, Belsidius. The protagonist reports that simply by observing the flow of magic, he could determine what magic the enemy was using, and if their magical skills were equal, then the one who uses it better would have an advantage. The protagonist, with a serious expression on his face, mentions Belcurious, the legendary eye, which in the entire magical history of the Empire was opened by only 3 people. He adds that if Belsidious is the ability to recognize an opponent's magic, then Belcurious is the ability to steal it. The main character and the magician in a cylindrical hat concentrate energy in their right hands. This eye is the reason the Ludwig family is known as the Mage Thieves. Red energy comes from the red eye. The main character with a thoughtful look says that now the goal of childhood has been achieved. He thought that without magical power and endurance he would not become a great magician. He remembers his past life being looked at by the rest of the group. Kevin calls to the protagonist, who is standing near the bookshelves. He asks his son if he is interested in the bloodline of their family's magic. The protagonist wondered if Dad was watching him. The father closes his eyes and says that it's too early, of course, and then asks his son if he wants to try to learn. The main character thought that it wouldn't hurt to study the theory in advance, and then responded positively to his father's proposal. Kevin tells his son that from today Alin will be his mentor, but only while he is at the academy. He adds that when he returns, he will teach the protagonist personally. The main character asks who Alin is. The father closes his eyes and says that she is a wonderful person, she teaches at Delighton, has great magical talent, and, above all, she is Aunt Alin, who loves her nephew more than anyone in the world. Someone appears wearing shoes. The father tells the protagonist that they met her when he was 6 years old. The main character makes a surprised expression on his face. A girl with long black hair and red eyes appears, as well as a bandage on her arm. Aunt approaches the protagonist. She looks at him carefully and shouts that this is just funny. She crosses her arms and, with a dissatisfied expression on her face, asks if the brilliant Professor Alin Ludwig should come in person, just to teach this disgruntled child. Alin Ludwig. The girl puts her hand on the protagonist's head, and he gets scared. With an angry expression on her face, she screams and asks the protagonist if he is ready. She screams and asks the protagonist if he knows who she is. The main character tells the girl that she is Alin's aunt. The girl moves away from the protagonist and moves her hand to the side, and then in a raised tone says that from now on the main character should address her as Professor Alin Ludwig, a great genius. She adds that she can't stand slow-witted people who don't understand the first time. She looks at the protagonist and tells him to never ask questions after she has taught him once, and then asks him if he understood. Thus began the protagonist's training in the bloodline magic of the Ludwig family. Bloodline magic is not recorded so that other magicians do not steal it. The person must meet with the magician of the family and directly receive the knowledge into their mind. Alin closes his eyes and points his index finger to his forehead, and then says that he will demonstrate, so you need to look carefully. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek. Auntie opens her eyes. Red energy emanates from the girl's eyes. The main character, with a frightened expression on his face, thought that these were the same eyes that he had already seen. The girl's eyes glow brightly. The main character, with a shocked expression on his face, thought it was Belsidious. The protagonist is impressed, and the girl laughs with a smug expression on her face. With a joyful expression on her face, she shouts to the protagonist that in order to use it, the main character needs to calculate 3 spells at the same time. She adds that someone like the protagonist can only dream about it. The main character clenches his hands into fists and shouts that he can do this. The girl with crossed arms tells the protagonist that he is so arrogant. Alin, satisfied with the protagonist's reaction, wrote down several formulas. It was an analysis of magic. Aunt puts forward her hand on which formulas are written. The main character holds sheets of paper with formulas in his hands and says that this is more theoretical than he expected. The main character remembers how in a past life he took a magician in a cylindrical hat by the collar with an angry expression on his face. He thought that if the founder of the Ludwig family had not imposed genetic restrictions, then Rin could take advantage of this. The aunt, with a smile on her face, asks the protagonist if it's really so difficult that it's not worth even trying, and he has no idea what it means. The main character looks over the formula and says that he just needs time to roughly understand it. Alin opens one eye and says that she has no choice and therefore she will make an exception. The protagonist takes the remaining sheets of formulas and thanks his aunt for guiding him, and then informs him that from now on he will figure it out on his own. The aunt stands in front of the protagonist, who is reading the formulas while sitting at the table. The The girl with a fake smile asks the protagonist what he said and does he really need her instructions, and then asks him not to ignore her. The main character looks at sheets with formulas. Aunt made a displeased expression on her face. She leaves and shouts to the protagonist to do what he wants, because he won't succeed. She adds that she will not teach the protagonist even if he tearfully begs her. The girl sits at a chair on the opposite side of the table and reads a book with a red cover. The main character writes on a piece of paper. Lin looks at the book with a surprised expression. The main character picks up a pencil. He touches his cheek and makes a thoughtful look. The aunt takes a piece of paper from the protagonist. She writes something on a piece of paper. The main character looks at the text in surprise. The girl covers her face with a book. They sit silently at the table. The main character holds a pencil in his hand and is lost in thought. Lin takes a piece of paper from the protagonist. She wrote the text on a piece of paper and returned it to the protagonist. The main character looks with misunderstanding at his aunt, who is covering her face with a book. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek and he remains silent for a while. A drop of sweat runs down the aunt's cheek from anxiety, and the protagonist wonders what is happening. He thought that this was really how modern magical education worked, or that she was testing it. The protagonist's mother watches him and his aunt. Lin closes his eyes and says that the break has begun. The main character's mother calls him twice, and the protagonist turns his head in her direction. The main character asks his mother what she needs. The red-haired girl approaches her son and asks if his aunt is unusual. The main character replies that she is very unusual. Mom tells the main character that his aunt is not very honest and in truth, she strives to teach him everything. So even if he already knows something, he should ask her a lot of questions. Mom closes her eyes with a smile on her face and says that she was the same when she and her father followed on their heels. She adds that Auntie was so charming. The main character thought that the meaning of the word charming had really changed in 300 years. The aunt sits cross-legged at the table next to the protagonist. Ryan looks at her with a displeased expression on her face. Aunt looks at the protagonist with her pupils. She opens her eyes wide in surprise, because she noticed that the protagonist was looking at her. Lin turns away from the main character. She looks at the main character again when he looked down at the manuscript again. The main character, with a dissatisfied expression on his face, thought that his aunt was very annoying, even more annoying than 6-year-old Sari. The main character turns to his aunt, and she shudders with anxiety. He hands her the manuscript and says that he cannot understand this part at all and asks her if she could help him. The main character looks at the girl with a calm look. The girl's cheeks turned red and she opened her eyes wide. She throws out the book and screams, asking the main character if he doesn't even know this, and then adds that their family is doomed. She asks the protagonist to bring the manuscript here and show him where exactly it is not clear to him. The main character points his finger at a certain part of the text. Lin tells the protagonist how he should solve this, and then adds that there is no problem. The girl snaps her fingers on the paper and shouts that if the protagonist uses this formula, he will be able to solve it much faster, and then asks if the protagonist didn't even know about it. The main character closes his eyes and asks for forgiveness. The girl shouts to the protagonist that he knows nothing and asks him what he did before he was 9 years old. The main character tells his aunt that she is absolutely right and asks her how he can solve the problem. Lin shouts what she thinks. She has no choice and will make an exception for the protagonist. The main character asks what about this. The aunt reports that this was the last exception and if the protagonist asks again, she will do something. Sheets of paper fly in the air. The main character asks the girl what about this. Lin asks what is so difficult about this and reports that this is the last exception. There is a bright glow in the middle of the sheets of paper. The protagonist thought that teaching Lin was always like this because it required a lot of effort. But thanks to her, he significantly reduced the time he spent studying theory and gained practical experience. He adds that on the 10th day after receiving Lin's instructions, he felt a burning pain in the retina of his eye. Red energy comes from the protagonist's eyes. He says his eyes hurt and his head feels like it's going to explode. He thought that he had a feeling that all the blood in his body was rushing to his head and the world was slowly turning blood red. The protagonist's eyes are wide open. He thought that then it happened. His eyes appeared, shining red, were engraved with the mark of death. The protagonist sees numbers on the lamp, window, and cabinet. He wonders what it is, and then adds that everything is converted into numbers. The main character creates fire above his palm and sees numbers on the flame. He asks what magic looks like. With a surprised expression on his face, he thought that he understood everything, and then, in the eyes of the young wizard, all his magic must have looked like numbers. The aunt looks at the protagonist, who says that this is truly amazing. The main character turns to his aunt. With a shocked expression on her face, she asks the protagonist that he really achieved this in just 10 days. Their Lin eyes emanate red energy, and he thought that even after receiving special education, it took her 7 years to master Bel Sidious. She remembers a man with dark hair from the Ludwig clan. She cries with her eyes closed and thought they said it would take 70 years to master Bel Curious. The protagonist looked at his aunt, who thought that this could really be in just 10 days. She adds that he did it from scratch, without knowing anything, before using several spells at the same time. A drop of sweat runs down Alin's cheek, and she thought that he could compete with Rin, who was called the master of simultaneous summoning. The main character looks at his aunt with concern on his face. Kevin's sweat drops and says his son awakened Bel Sidious in just 10 days. The aunt with a smile on her face tells her brother that thanks to Ryan, the Ludwig family can become the leading family of magicians, because he is truly amazing. A bang is heard behind the door. Kevin closes his eyes and says that as a father, he has nothing more to teach his son. He turns to Yud, who replies, yes. Behind the red cloth to the left of Kevin appears the silhouette of a man who asks to command him. The protagonist's father asks him to send a message to his father. The man behind the red cloth asks the protagonist's father if he means the former head of the family. There are many books on the shelves. Kevin asks if there are any problems. Yud, dressed in black, says no, that's not what he meant. The protagonist's father asks for the following message to be sent. Please set your grandson, who has an innate talent, on the right path. I respectfully ask you to do so. The main character sits at the table and looks through manuscripts. The man in black clothes has a surprised expression on his face. He smiles and tells Kevin that he really went through thick and thin for his son. The protagonist's father smiles a little, and his subordinate tells him that he will act as ordered and calls him Excellency. Spring has ended and a short summer has begun. Rain pours between the trees. The main character looks out the window while eating and thought that this summer seems to last about a year, and dark clouds covered the continent, pouring rain day after day. That summer, the protagonist was incredibly busy. Ryan has put a piece of meat on his fork and is preparing to eat it. During the day, he learned household magic from Alin. The aunt throws chalk at the protagonist, and the protagonist's mother watches from around the corner. The protagonist taught Sari the basics of magic whenever possible. The younger sister creates 3 small fountains of water above herself, and the protagonist covers his displeased face. At night, the protagonist focused on training his physical and magical strength. The main character drags behind him a large stone to which he is tied. The development of modern magic, which the protagonist learned from Alin and from books, was truly amazing, because for a person who lived 300 years ago, like the protagonist, it was shocking. The main character looks at the manuscript with a thoughtful look. He comes with the manuscripts and thought that they simplified such complex formulas to such an extent, and the activation time was reduced, and the power increased significantly. The manuscripts come from earth thorns, electricity, water, air, and fire. The main character thought that the level of magic had increased significantly compared to what it was 300 years ago. Standing near the table with manuscripts, he thought that he could lose to a modern 4-star magician, because magic grows over time. He thought with a serious expression that with his current condition, becoming a 7-star mage in this era was absolutely impossible. He thought that incredible strength and knowledge were needed. The main character in gray clothes with a high collar says that he has a request. The father asks what kind of request this is. The main character asks his mom and dad to send him to the city of magicians, because it will take about 3 years. Sari eats a loaf and asks his brother where he is going. The main character replies that he is thinking of going to the Golden Rose in the City of Magicians, because the best magical university Delayton is located there. The sister grabs the protagonist and screams at him not to leave under any circumstances. The main character tries to push his sister away and says that this is impossible. Kevin tells the protagonist to think about his age, because he is only 10 years old and it is too early to leave home. Alin is eating something with a satisfied expression on his face. Kevin, with his eyes closed, says that children from magical families enter Delayton when they turn 16, because then it is not too late to go to the City of Magicians. He opens his eyes and says that besides, an important meeting has already been scheduled. Sari raises her fists in the air with a displeased expression on her face while the protagonist pushes her away with a misunderstanding on her face at her father's words. The protagonist's father shows a sealed envelope. He says that this is a letter sent by his father, the protagonist's grandfather. Alin made a surprised expression on her face with meat in her mouth. She coughs twice. The protagonist's mother makes a surprised expression on her face and asks if this letter is for the protagonist. Kevin tells her to wipe her mouth before speaking. Sari grabs the protagonist by the shirt and head, and the protagonist wondered if this letter was from his grandfather. The sister pulls the protagonist's cheek. The protagonist's father says that in their Ludwig family there are only 3 people who awaken Belcurious. The main character imagined the image of a man with a mustache and gray hair. The main character thought that he was right. This is the awakener of Belcurious, Scalzi Ludwig. The protagonist pushes away his sister, who reaches her hands towards his head. Kevin, with a small smile on his face, tells the protagonist that his grandfather will personally guide him through Belcurious, and the protagonist asks if this is true. The father answers yes. The protagonist's mother hugs a crying Sari. Alin wipes his face. Kevin says that the protagonist must visit his grandfather first. The main character looks out of the carriage with a surprised expression on his face. He looks at the huge estate. The carriage heads towards the passage into his territory. The main character follows someone in a black hood and looks around. The main character goes inside the building and says that he will come and greet him. The main character enters the room where the grandfather is standing. Grandfather with his hands behind his back looks out the window. Grandfather looks at the protagonist. A drop of sweat runs down the main character's cheek. Scalzi Ludwig creates 3 magic triangles around 2 fingers. He points them down and a bright red glow appears. The main character felt a destructive aura from the grandfather standing in front of him. The bottle and dishes begin to shake. The chandeliers also shake. The main character, with concern on his face, wondered what his grandfather was thinking about. Scalzi concentrates violet energy in his left hand. 3 red magic triangles appear near his palm. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek. He thought that he needed to put aside his thoughts and start. Blue magic circles appear near his hands. The grandfather is enveloped in a red aura, and the protagonist is enveloped in a blue one. Scalzi's right eye glows red. Drops of sweat run down the protagonist's face. Grandfather has a stern expression on his face. Blue, crackling energy emanates from the protagonist's magic circles. The protagonist's magic circles disappear. He opens his eyes wide in surprise. He looks at his hands. Scalzi says it's Belcurious. After these words, the protagonist's facial expression becomes frightened. Red energy emanates from Grandpa's eyes. He says that it can control visible magic at the owner's request. Grandfather put his hand to his chest. The main character looks at him in surprise. He smiles nervously and exclaims, "Wow." He smiles nervously and exclaims, "Wow." Grandfather laughs a little, and then asks the protagonist if he wants to try it too. The main character answers whatever he wants. Kevin smiles a little with his eyes closed. Scalzi covers his face with his hand. He says with a smug smile on his face that mastering Belcurious is not everything, because in order to use it correctly, the master must fully understand it. He asks the protagonist what level he is at now. The main character says that he can barely quickly calculate a 3rd-star spell, while in fact he can cope with spells up to 5 stars. Grandfather says it's amazing and almost amazing. He closes his left eye and says that, however, Belcurious requires enormous magical power, and the protagonist in his current state is still far from that. The main character asks if this is just a long way. He clenches his hand into a fist and asks if this is impossible. Asks the girl to train him to this level. Scalzi looks at the protagonist with a serious expression on his face and says that his training will be very hard, because this is the only way he will learn correctly. The protagonist's father turns around with a satisfied expression on his face. Scalzi says his first greeting was too rude and he apologizes. He adds that he sincerely welcomes them both. He says he invites Kevin to have a drink together after they confirm Ryan's suitability. Kevin opens his eyes wide. He turns to his grandfather. Scalzi raises his right hand at shoulder level. Kevin bows to his father. It's snowing outside. A lot of snow remains under the fir trees. Scalzi concentrates crackling golden energy in his hand and shouts to the protagonist that he must be able to use Belcurious fluently. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek and he steps back. Grandfather shouts at him to quickly cast the spell, and the protagonist agrees. Scalzi asks the protagonist if he's just going to stand by and watch the enemy's spell activate, and then asks him to act faster. The main character jumped away from the place where a huge amount of golden energy hit. Grandfather, with a smile on his face, concentrates golden energy in his hands and thought that the protagonist has a truly amazing talent, because if you teach him one thing, he comprehends 100 or even 1,000. He adds that Ryan is a genius who can master in one go what would take others a month. The main character clenched his teeth. Grandfather thought that all that remained was to master the use of the eyes and develop magic. Scalzi concentrates fire in his hands and tells the protagonist that in training, he must risk his life in order to grow significantly. The main character runs away from his grandfather. He tells his grandfather that he understands everything. Streams of fiery energy gather into a ball above the grandfather's hand. He says that he will now release a fireball. He looks at the protagonist and tells him that if he cannot dodge, he will die. The main character opens his eyes wide in surprise. He stops running and stops. Scalzi raises his hand and is about to release a fireball. The main character shouts Belsidious and a bright glow appears in his eyes. Grandfather fired a fireball directly at the protagonist. He asks Ryan to hurry up and then thought that he could absorb his opponent's magic with Belsidious and manipulate it with Belcurious. Blood pours from the protagonist's eyes. Grandfather shouts the name Ryan. The fireball almost reached the protagonist. The protagonist's eye turns red. A 7-pointed symbol appears in the protagonist's eye. He sees the numbers on the fireball. He sees the numbers on his grandfather. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek. A fireball with many numbers on it is located right next to the protagonist. He thought that Belcurious was activated and smoke was coming from his eyes. He thought that the universe is converted into equations and goes directly to the brain, and now he needs to change the formulas at his discretion. The fireball almost touched the protagonist. The main character raises his hand. He thought that the magic array consists of 2 triangles. The assigned runic symbol is the Rudichin formula with size 17 axles, diapason 23. Numbers appear around the protagonist's hand. He thought that the solution to the equation was an imaginary root. The fireball glows brightly and disappears. Grandfather has a surprised expression on his face. The main character is staggering from fatigue. Scalzi picks up the protagonist, who almost fell. Ryan asks his grandfather if he could. Grandfather, with a smile on his face, tells the protagonist that he made it and now he only needs to strengthen his magical power. He looks at the protagonist with reddened eyes and tells him that he cannot believe that the protagonist awakened Belcurious in himself at the age of 14. Grandpa has a drop of sweat running down his cheek. He thought that he had barely reached this level at 39 years old, and this boy could rewrite the history of the Empire. There is a lot of snow on the ground among the trees. The grandfather addresses the protagonist, after which he looks at him. Scalzi tells the protagonist that he won't weigh in on his life, but he has something to say. He says that when the main character turns 16, he must knock on the door of Delayton. The main character thought that, to be honest, the Delayton University of Magic was not interesting to him. Grandfather tells the protagonist that if he graduates from the university at the highest level, he will have a chance to meet the Archmage Rin and answers. There are many snow-covered fir trees around. The main character says that he is not very interested in this. He mentally tells his grandfather to stop mocking the dead. The protagonist and grandfather leave footprints in the snow. Grandfather says that he felt the same, but the heroine of Lista left a letter. He asks the protagonist if he is not interested in its content. The main character opens his eyes wide in surprise. He remembers the image of Lista with a sword behind his back. He wondered if she had really left a letter for him. Grandfather says that no one of his age has ever awakened Belcurious, and with his abilities he should be able to read the letter. The main character, with a surprised expression on his face, thought that at that moment he was stunned and could only listen indifferently. He adds that looking back, he can say that this was just the beginning. He remembers the image of a white-haired girl and thought that this was a story about a journey along the path of former comrades, following a letter from Lista. The main character walks next to his grandfather. The protagonist and his family are standing near the estate. Ryan says that Delayton's entrance exams are about 6 months away, and he will take this opportunity to explore the world and visit different places. Kevin puts his hand forward and wishes the protagonist success, and also asks him to return. With a smile on his face, he asks the protagonist if he plans to stay in the magical city after the exams. The main character answers that yes, because this is the place where all knowledge is collected. Sari hugs her mother with a dissatisfied expression on her face. Delayton's notoriously difficult entrance exam takes place at the end of the year, and those who pass it begin their first semester in March. Many people are standing outside the academy building. An orange leaf that fell from a tree flies near the protagonist. The protagonist's mother asks the main character if he is sure of this and adds that she is worried that he will be alone, without protection. The main character looks around. Kevin says that Ryan's skills are already exceptional and there will be no danger if he follows the known path. The protagonist looks at the blue sky and thought about peace. He wonders if, when he looks back, he will ever be able to call this conversation a memory. An orange leaf falls to the ground. 16th day of travel. The protagonist walks along a red bridge. Behind him there is a wooden building. Nearby, a fisherman in a cone-shaped hat catches fish. Southern part of the Holy Empire, Harem region. Two fishermen in cone-shaped hats are walking towards the protagonist. The main character thought that in the small town there were many taverns and taverns. He looks at the fishermen and thought how curious it was that all the people passing by were wearing bamboo hats. A man with black hair wearing a bamboo hat asks the protagonist if he wonders why everyone wears bamboo hats, and then asks him if he knows about the Rin caravan. The main character asks what kind of caravan Rin is. The man in the hat tells the protagonist that he looks smart, but doesn't know much. He adds that long ago, their first leader received help from the Archmage Rin. The protagonist asks Rin if it was, and the man with a mug in his hand answers yes. The man adds that they wear bamboo hats as a sign of gratitude. The main character has a thoughtful look. The black-haired guy asks the protagonist if he's impressed, and then adds that this is a trading group with such a great history. Behind the man lies a staff. The main character, with a thoughtful look, averted his pupils to the side and wondered who this first leader was. He adds that if she hears his name, she might remember. A man drinks from a mug, and the protagonist asks what such respected merchants are doing in such a small town. The man in the bamboo hat replies that there is a problem on the road leading to the sunlit highway. A dark passage can be seen among the bamboo. The man says that ferocious monsters have appeared there, and dozens of people have gone missing. He says with a displeased expression that they are waiting for the Lord's forces to come and destroy them, and then he adds that he wonders what the trading partners will say. The main character thought about the monsters with a calm look. Creatures whose essence has been distorted by the abyss are called monsters. A four-winged monster with 4 eyes, which looks like a fly, opens its mouth. They are similar to animals, but have a much more grotesque appearance and dangerous magical abilities. The monster with many tentacles smiles. A multi-legged monster with many eyes and a nose on top opens its mouth with sharp teeth. No matter how many monsters are destroyed, they never disappear. The main character clenches his hand into a fist and concentrates red energy in it. He thought that as long as it wasn't a top-level monster, it shouldn't be in danger. The main character leaves with a bag over his shoulder, and the man in the hat wishes the protagonist a good journey. The crescent moon rises above the treetops. The main character walks past many bamboo trees. He thought that he felt that he was being watched, but it did not attack. The protagonist's eyes are covered by the shadow of his hair. He thought that perhaps it sensed the difference in magical power like an animal instinct. The protagonist walks along the path. He remembered the words of the man in the bamboo hat and thought that he could cope with monsters of this level. The main character looks forward. He averted his pupils to the side and thought that this was not his concern. He walks into the darkness and thought that the monster extermination team would take care of it. Ryan passes near the grass. He remembers someone saying that they will go from here overland. Someone else asks what the first interlocutor means. The main character plunges into memories and remembers how he stopped. Lista points to a certain place on the paper map and says that they will go along the Bullied River and head to Turwinup. Pride agrees with the white-haired girl. The white-haired girl says that there is an amazing field of flowers along the river, and then asks the protagonist if he wants to look along the way. Pride asks where the flower field is, and the main character gets angry. He shouts and asks the girls what they are doing. The main character clutches the staff in his hand and shouts that 2 groups of warriors who crossed to the continent before them were destroyed while fighting at the front. He adds that because of this, the front line has stalled, and they are barely holding on, waiting for help from other heroes. Kai's holds the bird on his hand, and Pride and Lista look at the protagonist. The main character shouts and asks the group members if they understand the importance of this situation. Lister replies that of course he knows, because the Legion of Red Dragons and the Legion of Yellow Dragons are heading to the battlefield and all the strong mercenaries cross the sea for honor and glory. Pride smokes a pipe with his eyes closed. The main character shouts that that's why they also need to hurry. He says in a calm voice that this is why he is saying this. Kais looks at the bird with a straight face. The main character says that when all the strong ones left, monsters began to run all over the continent, as if they were waiting for this moment, and, at best, they belong to danger level C and maybe B. He imagines the silhouettes of monsters. The first one has big hands, the second one has big wings, the third one has spikes sticking out of it, and the fourth one looks like a beetle. The protagonist adds that they don't have time to deal with such things. Lista turns to Rin. The protagonist has an angry expression on his face. The white-haired girl tells the main character that there are many people in this world who desperately need help, even with what seems like a trifle. She adds that there is no difference in asking for help. She tells the protagonist that she hopes he will become an adult who will help such people. The protagonist covers his face with his hand and says that even though he died 300 years ago, they are still annoying. The main character looks through the fingers on his hand. He says that he needs to rest because he is too tired, and then sits on a stone and materializes a magic square in his hand. He casts a spell. He holds a magic square in his hand. The chief releases the magic square and commands him to find it. The spell buries itself in the ground. The mouse jumps over the magic, which leaves bumps in the ground above it. A crow sits on a branch and a spell moves underground underneath it. The main character is sitting on a stone. There is fog in front of him. Magic particles rise into the air. The dark silhouette screams loudly. The main character commands a spell to bring him here. Something like a worm bursts out of the ground. It lands on the ground. The magic worm grabbed the many-eyed monster with sharp teeth. The monster growls loudly. The main character with a stern look asks the monster if he really calls this a threat. He clenches his hand into a fist and the worm's grip tightens. The protagonist informs the monster that he has destroyed countless of his relatives. The monster opens its mouth and screams loudly. The protagonist tells him that he will let him go if he promises not to harm people. The monster screams loudly, and the protagonist concentrates red energy in his hand and tells the monster that although he still won't understand him. The monster opened his eyes wide. The worm tore the monster into several pieces. The main character leaves, leaving the monster behind, and says that it didn't help and adds that it was just out of boredom. The border between the central and southern regions of the empire. This place was called the Badantio mountain range. The protagonist is attacked by 3 huge blue worms with paws. They rush towards the protagonist. The main character, with an angry expression on his face, thought how dare an insignificant beast look down on him. Someone hit the monsters with arrows. The protagonist has a surprised expression on his face. The main character turns around and sees someone landing on the ground. They were 2 archers, one of whom had green hair tied in a ponytail. The protagonist opened his eyes wide in surprise. He asks the man with green hair if he is Kai's. Shadows from the hair cover the eyes of men with bows and green cloaks, on which there is an icon in the form of a shield. The main character looks at 2 archers who are on a hill. An archer with green hair jumps towards the protagonist. He asks the main character if he is okay. The main character smelled alcohol. A green-haired man with freckles and a red face tells the protagonist that monsters often appear in this place. He asks him if no one warned him on the way here. The second archer with brown hair asks why there was a warning. He lands nearby. With a reddened face, he says that they, the descendants of the Great Palace, guard it. The main character stands silently for a while. He thought it couldn't be Kai's. He puts his hand to his cheek and closes his eyes, and then tells the archers that he doesn't know what school they are from, but they helped him and that's why he thanks them. The main character asks the archers if this is the Badantio mountain range. The archers look at each other. They laugh, and the main character makes a surprised expression on his face. The angry protagonist asks what's so funny. The brown-haired archer reports that a lot of time has passed since he turned into Kislantine, but he still calls him Badantio. Kislantine. It means Kai's Palace mountain range. After defeating the Abyss, Kai's seems to have taken root here. The archers tell everything to the protagonist. They were students of the archery school founded by Kai's. The brown-haired guy gives a thumbs up and tells a story with a smile on his face. The main character opened his eyes wide in surprise. Traditionally, this passage is guarded by those recognized by the school principal. The brown-haired guy points his finger at the protagonist. The green-haired guy clenches his hand into a fist with a smile on his face. The protagonist remembers the archer Kai's. The protagonist, with a smile on his face, thought that drunken archery was really the main skill of this school. He wonders what exactly they did to be assigned here. The brown-haired man hugs the protagonist and tells him that he came at the right time, because today is a festival. He states that this is a day when everyone can drink free alcohol, and then adds that the protagonist must know the taste of alcohol if he wants to be an adult. He raises his hand at shoulder level and says that alcohol is the path to the sun and moon. The green-haired guy tells the brown-haired guy that he is a cultured person. The green-haired guy leaves and tells the brown-haired guy not to think that he can miss his shift today by talking nonsense. He adds that they still have to guard the place. The brown-haired guy screams and asks how they can let such a child go alone, and then adds that this is unacceptable. The brown-haired guy carries the protagonist away and says that he will simply take him to the entrance to the village and then return. A brown-haired archer steps on autumn leaves. The main character asks if the road is hidden because of fallen leaves. The brown-haired archer says that they remove the leaves, but this year so many leaves have fallen that even removing them takes forever. The archer then tells something to the protagonist, who look to the side. The main character walks with a serious expression on his face. He looks around. The brown-haired archer tells the protagonist that if he goes up the wooden stairs from here, he will find the training hall, and if he goes straight along the path, he can get to the village. They approach a stone tombstone. The main character made a surprised expression on his face. He looks at the tombstone. He took a closer look at it. He tries to read the inscriptions on the stone. The protagonist put his hand to his chest. A bead of sweat runs down his cheek. He remembers the image of Kai's. He has a shocked expression on his face. A brown-haired archer with a smile on his face asks the protagonist why he doesn't stop and make a wish since he's going somewhere. The main character asks what we are talking about. The archer asked the protagonist if he was serious, and then said that, given his age, he might not know about it. The main character asks what he should know. The archer says that this is the tomb of the Kai's palace. The protagonist has an extremely shocked expression on his face. Archer adds that people usually make a wish here saying, "Please protect us this year as well." The main character tells the archer not to joke like that. The archer, with a misunderstanding on his face, asks the protagonist why he should joke. The main character says that this is strange and asks that he is building a tomb in the middle of the mountain. Fog gathers near the tombstone. The main character remarks that Kai's is a hero, and then asks if this is true. The archer asks the protagonist if he knows the history of this tomb and if he is really from this country. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek. The archer approaches the tombstone and tells the protagonist that among Kai's comrades there was an archmage named Rin, and then asks him if he knows about it. The brown-haired archer says that this is a well-known fact, so the protagonist should know, but it is said that Rin was very shy. The protagonist is silent for a while. The archer reports that Kai's believed that Rin would return even after death. The main character asks what he means. The archer says that if the grave had been in the village, he would not have been able to come because he was embarrassed, so he asked to be buried here. The main character listens carefully to the archer. The protagonist remembers how the protagonist and Lista were sort of snoring Kai's, and Pride was standing on a hill in the background. Rin tells Kai's that he smells like alcohol and then asks him to stop snoring already. Fire burns the web. The main character with fire magic in his hand asks Kai's, who touched his head, not to touch his hair. The group is in the library. Lista and Pride are near the bird in cloth clothes with a hood. The main character reads a book and shows how to write a certain character, and Kai's watches with crossed arms. The archer places his hand on the protagonist's head. The main character, with an angry expression on his face, removes his hand and says that he asked not to touch his hair. The main character holds his head with his left hand. He remembers Kai's smiling. The protagonist wonders if he knew that this was goodbye forever and that they would never meet again. The shadow covers half of the protagonist's face. There is a glow coming from the archer's grave. The protagonist removes his hand from his head. He thought that it wasn't and that a crack was appearing on the wall. The main character, with concern on his face, thought that this was not true. Drops of sweat run down the protagonist's face. The protagonist imagines Lista, Pride and Kai's, who says that he promised to return. He turns around with a smile on his face and says that he promised to meet him. The archer's head decomposes and he says that the protagonist promised. The main character opens his eyes wide. He abruptly runs away from the brown-haired archer. The main character runs through the forest. He has a frightened expression on his face. He trips over a bump. He falls face down on the ground. The main character is lying on the ground. He clenched his hand into a fist. The main character lies on the ground in the middle of the path. The protagonist sits on the edge of a cliff. He looks down and thought that he should go back. His eyes are covered by the shadow of his hair and he thought that he should turn around and go to Kai's grave and say goodbye. The sun is shining in the evening sky. The protagonist thought that even if it was too late, it must be said that he had returned. He remembers Pride exhaling cigarette smoke and thought he should say that he is sorry and asks for forgiveness. He remembers Lista smiling. He remembers Kai's, who reaches his hand towards the protagonist's head. The moon is in the sky. A black bird with a small beak sits on a branch. The main character lay down on the ground and plunged into memories. The protagonist sees a bird and asks if it is it. The main character closed his eyes and remembers how he told the archer that since he was able to find him in such darkness, it means that he has very good eyesight. The protagonist opened his mouth slightly. The archer shot at the target. The protagonist asks him how he can aim when he's drunk. Lista has a happy expression on her face, while Pride smokes with a happy expression on her face. Kai's is shaking, and Pride holds a vessel in his hand and tells him to drink it. The main character asks the archer if he really can't aim when he's sober. Lister replies that this is true, and the protagonist asks why. The main character smiles. He remembers Lista telling him that Kai's doesn't have a tongue, and that's why he can't speak. Pride is in the background talking to a merchant. Pride and Lista look at the protagonist, who covers his ears with his palms and says that today is unusually noisy, and that's why he can't sleep. Kai snores in the background. The protagonist made a wide smile and remembered how he had then told the rest of the group that it was usually quiet here, but at night it was very noisy. He remembers Lista, Pride, and Kai's mourning the dying protagonist. The main character is currently laughing while lying on the ground. Tears are running down Lista's face, Kai's eyes are covered by a shadow, and the red-haired girl has made a worried expression on her face. The main character continues to laugh while lying near the cliff. He remembers how he smiled while on the verge of death. He covers his face with his hand. He remembers Kai's, who closed his eyes. The main character covers his face with his second hand and cries. Orange leaves fly up straight towards the moon. The main character looks out from behind the vegetation. He's heading somewhere. He sees Kai's grave. He looked closely at the inscription on the tombstone. The protagonist steps on the leaves. He materializes a magical red triangle in his hand. He puts his hand forward. Magic particles emanate from the triangle. He clenches his hand into a fist and powerful red energy emanates from it. He hits the ground with his fist and powerful streams of fire appear. They move apart. The leaves that were lying on the ground burn. Even more leaves burn. The main character stands among the flames. He looks at Kai's grave. There are no more orange leaves around her. The fiery energy is in the protagonist's hand. The archer's grave is illuminated by sunlight. Sunlight falls on the protagonist. The main character stands in one place. He turns in the opposite direction. He walks away from Kai's grave. He remembers how as Rin he walked next to Kai's and smiled. The protagonist apologizes to the archer and says that it is not because he is shy, but because he does not have the courage to face everyone. The protagonist walks towards the sun. The protagonist remembers the image of Kai's and smiles, and then thought that he does not have the courage to face and ask for forgiveness. The protagonist's eyes are covered by a shadow. Transparent images of Rin and Kai's walk next to him. He leaves their ghostly images far behind and thought that he could not keep the promise he made to everyone. There is a bright sun in the sky. Drops of sweat flow down the protagonist due to the heat. He thought that autumn in the south was simply stunning. With a tired expression on his face, he thought that under such a summer-autumn sky, a brilliant city stretched out in front of him. Sunlight illuminates city buildings. The main character stands at the gate, and many people pass next to him. He walks with an open book and thought that this is the magical city of Golden Rose, and in the heart of the Golden Rose Delayton University was built. The protagonist slammed the book shut and thought that this city had been interesting to him since his past life, but it did not live up to his expectations. A fat man holds books in his hands and shouts that he has books on magic for sale, and then he adds that they also have study guides written by experienced magic teachers. A man who is missing many teeth holds a crystal in his hand and says that it is a tool for enhancing magic, and this is a rare item found in a dungeon by a silver rank adventurer. A brown-haired man holds a yellow shell in his hand and asks what it is. The protagonist passes near many people and thought of the phrase, "All knowledge passes through the Golden Rose." He adds that this is a phrase corresponding to the status of this place where everything gathers. The main character examines the stones from the merchant and asks how much it costs. The black-haired merchant replies that it is only 10 copper coins. The protagonist asks if it's really only 10 copper coins, and the merchant answers with a smile on his face that yes. The protagonist holds a brown stone in his hand and says that it cost only 10 copper coins. With a smile on his face, he says that he remembers that he paid at least 80 copper coins for it back then. The black-haired merchant apologizes to the protagonist. He tells the main character that the bell on the clock tower is ringing, and then adds that the exam is about to begin. The main character opened his eyes wide in surprise. He gives the merchant 10 coins, and the merchant thanks him. The main character thought that he almost forgot, because he is here to take the exam at Delayton. The protagonist and the merchant notice something. A man in a purple raincoat runs through a crowd of people. Someone shouts to catch the thief. The main character thought that the security here was not very good. The thief runs pushing people around. The main character turns away with his eyes closed and thought that this is a big city, so the guards should cope. The old woman encounters the protagonist. She falls to the ground. The main character apologizes and asks the old lady if she is okay. He tells her that she seems okay, and then apologizes and tells her that he's late. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek. The old woman says in a trembling voice that this is not for sale, it is a family heirloom. She adds that her grandson needs this stone for the entrance exam and asks for it back. The protagonist has a surprised expression on his face. The main character leaves, looking at the old woman and wondering why he should help, because he also has an exam. He turns his head in the direction of movement and thought that now is not the time. The protagonist turns his head again. He imagines an image of Lista telling Rin to help her. The main character approaches the old woman and asks her if that man stole her family heirloom. With an angry expression, he puts his hand in front of the old lady and tells her to wait here for a minute. The old woman looks at the protagonist with a surprised expression. The main character remembers Lista. The main character makes a jump. He jumped off the roof. The townspeople are watching the protagonist. The main character materializes a 5-pointed figure in his right hand and watches the thief. Golden crackling energy appears in the protagonist's hand. He shouts that he already has a lot to do, but he has to do this too. He tells the thief that now he will turn into ashes. Someone jumped from the fence on the balcony. Someone put a hand on the protagonist's shoulder. It was a brown-haired girl wearing white and gold clothes. She pushes the protagonist away and yells at him to move away. She creates a magic square and jumps towards the thief while the protagonist lands on the roof. A bright cloud of light appears in front of the girl's hands. A lot of sand appears around the thief. The sand collects into a single hole near the thief, who, with a frightened expression on his face, wonders if it is sand. Something humanoid in shape is formed from the sand. The brown-haired girl lands on a sand pillar. She removes the sand from the thief and shouts that stealing other people's property in the Golden Rose is brave and we must give him credit. But she thinks that he chose the wrong day. The main character watches what is happening with a dissatisfied expression on his face. The girl puts her hand forward. Under the sand pillar stand 2 sand guards with sand spears in their hands. The girl tells the thief that he is finished because he was caught by none other than Kristaton. A brown-haired girl with brown hair smiles joyfully. The main character looks at her and thought that this girl uses sand and is also very confident. The main character, with surprise on his face, thought that it was Warden. He thought that the Warden family was located on the eastern edge of the border and, like the Ludwig family, it was one of the 5 magic families. The protagonist remembers how the Ludwig and Warden families separated. Among the people present are the protagonist and Kristaton. The protagonist thought that before he regained his past memories, they met several times at a family gathering. The brown-haired girl waves at the protagonist and yells at him to put in some effort, then asks him if he likes living like a fool. The girl points her index finger at the protagonist and exclaims that he is a descendant of a family of magicians, even the eldest son. The main character looks at the girl with a calm expression on his face, and she asks him if he isn't ashamed. The protagonist turns around and leaves, and then thought that every time they saw each other, Kristaton was always smart, so he called her a nerd. The protagonist wonders how she already wears the uniform, since she must be the same age as him. The thief smiles and takes a piece of paper from his pocket. Kristaton makes a surprised expression on her face. The thief throws a piece of paper and it glows green. Powerful currents of air come from a sheet of paper and push away the brown-haired girl. The air currents emanating from the spell intensify. Local residents are scared because of what is happening. The brown-haired guy rises out of thin air and calls out to his mom, who reaches out to him. The tree root grabs the brown-haired boy. Mom takes her child in her arms. The protagonist materializes a magic rectangle. His eyes glow red because he used Bell Sidious. He thought what it meant, that thief was also a magician. The thief puts forward his hand, which is wearing a lot of jewelry. The main character thought that he had pretty decent magical power. He takes a closer look at the thief's hand and wonders what is on his left hand. Kristaton creates yellow magic squares at his hands, and then shouts to the enemy that he is very good for a thief. He tells him that he should try to block it then. She materializes 2 magic squares. The thief's face expresses misunderstanding. The main character, with a surprised expression on his face, thought that this was 2-star magic. The girl smiles, because many magic squares have appeared between her hands. She aligns her hands. Citizens hear a very loud sound. The stone floor behind the girl breaks. The main character thought that if the Ludwig family is known as thieving magicians, then the Warden family is known as commanding magicians. A lot of sand comes out of the ground behind the girl. The main character thought that the bloodline of the Warden family magicians was earth magic. A large sand golem appears in front of the thief, enveloped in red energy. The brown-haired girl tells the frightened thief to just try to brag again. Kristaten straightens her hair with a smile on her face. The sand golem has 2 eyes that glow red. The thief clenched his teeth. He raises his left hand with bracelets up and shouts that with this he is invincible. Bracelets with red stone glow purple. Kristaten has a wary expression on her face. The sand golem is pierced by black energy. The brown-haired girl looks at the sand golem with a surprised expression on her face. The thief made a huge smile on his face. The sand golem is emitting smoke and its eyes have stopped glowing. The golem's eyes glow red again. A bead of sweat runs down the brown-haired girl's cheek. The girl's golem is about to strike, and she puts her hand forward and asks the thief if he really thought that she would fall from such an attack. The girl opened her eyes wide. The thief with a smile on his face materializes a cross and black-violet energy. The golem attacks Kristaten. Golden energy smashes the sand golem. The protagonist tells the thief that by showing your trump card so early, you will certainly receive an attack. The thief has a worried expression on his face. The brown-haired girl opened her eyes wide. The protagonist destroyed the golem's hand. The main character stood right in front of the girl. He asks the thief to give him advice. The thief has a worried expression on his face. The main character concentrates crackling golden energy in his hand. He says that in magic, just because you cast a spell first doesn't mean he's already won. The thief clenched his teeth. Kristaten asks the protagonist if it is him. The main character materializes a blue circle above his palm. The thief clenched his hand into a fist and addresses the golem. The sand golem is about to attack with its remaining hand. The main character inscribed the water rune, after which a small amount of water began to appear from the circle. A huge stream of water is directed directly at the golem from the protagonist's magic circle. Kristaten and the protagonist's clothes are now wet. The girl asks the main character if he is a water magician. The main character and the brown-haired girl look in surprise at the golem, which is still intact. Kristaten removes the water from her cheek and says that the element of water may be the natural enemy of the element of earth, but her golem will not fall from a 1-star spell. Water is dripping from the golem. The thief with a crazy expression on his face asks the protagonist if this is all he has, even though he is bragging. The sand golem swings its hand at the protagonist and the brown-haired girl. The thief shouts that the protagonist does not know his place and is still bragging. Kristaten is about to dodge the attack. The golem strikes the protagonist and the girl. The main character puts his hands forward and a blue circle appears in front of them. A powerful stream of water pushes away the golem's hand. Kristaten shouts to the protagonist that it doesn't work. The thief shouts that he should stop wasting time and asks the protagonist to die. The protagonist pushes the monster away with a powerful stream of water. He casts the spell with an angry expression on his face. The golem emits red, crackling energy. The main character maintains his spell with a serious expression. The golem's hand is strongly pushed away from the protagonist. The thief's face expresses bewilderment. Beads of sweat run down his face. The golem looks at his hand. He makes another fist attack. The brown-haired girl made a surprised expression on her face. The protagonist jumped away from the golem's fist and pulled the girl along with him. The sand golem hits the ground. The golem begins to fall apart, small particles of it falling to the ground. The thief screams loudly in fear. The golem falls to the ground. The main character stays on his feet, and the girl behind him falls to the ground. The thief materializes a black cross in front of him. The protagonist thought that by stealing other people's magic, it seems that you cannot use your own. Kristaten holds his head and screams, asking the protagonist what he is doing, because it's dangerous. The main character creates 2 magic squares with his hands. The brown-haired girl has a surprised expression on her face. The protagonist's hands are covered with water. He thought that the 1-star spell had been forged just a few seconds ago. The shape of the magic circle is a double square. The inscribed runes are Yul and Ko. For earth element magic, it gives the properties binding and backflow. The equation to solve is previs differentiation. The protagonist raises his hands above himself and the magic squares glow brightly. He says that the decision has been received. The protagonist with a serious expression says that he is changing the law. The light in the hands of the protagonist becomes even brighter. A large crack appears in the ground. Roots appear from under the ground near the golem. One of the roots pierced the golem. Another root also pierced the golem. The thief, with fear on his face, calls out to the golem. The roots bound the sand golem. One of the roots hits the golem in the eye. Near the thief, 2 more roots appear from under the ground. Beads of sweat run down his face. He screams loudly. Kristaten looks at the protagonist. The protagonist removes the bracelet with red stones from the thief's hand. The protagonist looks at the bracelet and asks if it is an artifact, and then adds that it looks interesting. The thief screams and asks the protagonist to give him the bracelet, because it belongs to him. The main character, with an angry expression on his face, asks the thief if he is a fool, because he stole this thing. The protagonist looked at the bracelet with a thoughtful look. He thought that his stealing control of an opponent's magic was similar to Belsidius. He adds that the stone has 2 magic circles engraved on it, which means he can steal up to 2 stars magic. The thief, with a frightened expression on his face, asks the protagonist who he is and how he was able to cast magic so quickly. The main character leaves the thief. The protagonist thought that the thief would not believe him even if he told him. The main character goes to the old woman. The old woman looks at the protagonist with a surprised expression on her face. The protagonist hands her a bracelet and tells her to take care of this thing. He hands the bracelet to the old woman. The main character looks at the old woman. The old woman is crying, clutching a bracelet in her hand. The townspeople admire the protagonist. One of the townspeople shouts that it was amazing. The main character closes his eyes and puts his palm to his temple. One of the townspeople shouts that Lady Warden was amazing too. The main character remembered the exam with a shocked expression. It's as if lightning strikes the ground near him. The main character begins to run, leaving the thief behind. Someone put a sword to the thief's head. The sword is held by a man in a robe with a hood. A man in a hooded robe turns to Krista and tells her that she made a mistake. Krista looks at the man in the robe with a dissatisfied expression on her face. She calls the man in the robe Professor Caroline. A professor with blonde hair takes off his hood. She tells Krista that being confident is great, but she shouldn't have used the golem hastily. Krista closes her eyes and says that she knows, and then adds that next time she will be more careful. She says that quick self-reflection is a good quality of hers. With a smile on her face, she raises her index finger and asks the professor if she has seen the protagonist, because he is so amazing. She adds that his casting speed was almost the same as the professor's. Caroline laughs a little and then says that she saw it and it seems like he's even faster than her. Krista replies that he was not that fast. She straightens her hair with her hand and asks what happened, and then says that this guy didn't seem that strong during the selection. The professor asks that if he came for the entrance exam, then why was he here? Krista asks Caroline what she is talking about, and the professor replies that the exam has already started a long time ago. The brown-haired girl's expression becomes surprised. The main character runs with a frightened expression on his face. Krista covers her face with her hand and asks the professor if she really can't accept it. Caroline replies that those are the rules. Krista, with a dissatisfied expression on her face, asks the blonde if she could be a little more lenient if you were late because you were helping someone. The professor asks the brown-haired girl since when does she think so much about others. Krista answers the professor that she has seen it before. Such a person must exist to make it more interesting. A bound thief is suspended in the air. The brown-haired girl crosses her arms and says that it would be better for the school to have interesting characters, and then asks if that's true. The professor is silent for a while with a calm expression on his face. She replies that it is true. There is a sign at the entrance that says this is a professor's office. The blonde takes a book from the shelf. She flipped through the pages of a book at the table and thought that the protagonist had no experience in participating in magic competitions, and also did not have significant achievements in other areas. The blonde with a deadpan expression thought that the genius prodigy they were talking about might be a disaster sent to the Ludwig family from heaven. She looked closely at a certain part of the text in the book. She read in the book that the protagonist was Scalzi Ludwig's assistant for 3 years. She imagines the image of Scalzi, whose face is hidden in shadow, and wonders if the protagonist was under the command of the former magician and head of the Osirius school. She remembers Scalzi, who scatters manuscripts and thought that the fact that you are a relative does not mean that everything is possible for you. She remembers Alin, near whom manuscripts fall. Caroline is watching the head of the Ludwig family and Alin from around the corner. She thought that he was the type who would mercilessly reject someone if they didn't bring results. She rested her chin and thought that if he is an assistant, then why is he called a genius prodigy in the 8 great schools? The professor smiles a little. She turns to Barden's assistant. The assistant answers her request. Caroline asks to set up a meeting with the rector because she needs to discuss something about an individual appointment. Sunlight falls on a building with a high tower. Sunlight filters through the windows. Someone in a female voice says that it seems history is repeating itself. She reports that she doesn't know for sure, but it seems that the talented ones always appear at the same period. The girl has twisted shoes. Caroline names the names: Hubert from Rohuanum School, Lillian from Rivendell School, Caden from Harem School, Nora from Melev School, Logan from Chehak School. A pink-haired girl in a hat stands by the window. The professor reports that 5 latecomers from 8 main schools were admitted immediately. She puts her hand on the documents. She says that the warden family also sent a talented child, but he may have problems. One of the documents shows Krista. The pink-haired girl says that because the conflict between the magical families and the 8 schools is very deep. The professor stands with his eyes closed. The pink-haired girl adds that getting involved in student disputes is not very pleasant. But there is no doubt that this is a special situation, and therefore she must notify the professors and teachers. With a serious expression on her face, she says that you need to carefully observe the students and intervene if necessary, but you should not interfere too often. Rector of Delayton, Madelia Page. She asks what happened to the professor, who remains silent. Caroline looks down and says she thinks it's too early and asks if it's too early to make such a decision. Madelia asks to tell you more. The professor says that it turns out that there is another genius in this generation besides Krista. The pink-haired girl listens with a serious expression on her face. She puts her hand on the documents on the table and asks if there are new students that she doesn't know about. The professor answers that no, it wasn't. Madelia asks if this could be the child she wants to give an extra test to. One of the documents shows Ryan. The professor tells the girl that she won't believe it even if she tells him, and then adds that she could very well have seen him at a family meeting. The pink-haired girl tells the professor that she still has the habit of slapping hands. Caroline says that this is just her personal opinion, but could Madelia give Ludwig the opportunity to do so? The pink-haired girl looks at the document, and the professor says that she is curious how he would behave in such a situation. Madelia says they'll find out the results soon, then adds that Owen is there after all. She imagines the image of a bearded man. The pink-haired girl asks if he really said that he would not accept any reward. Sunlight filters through the window and illuminates the plant. The professor replies that yes, he doesn't like it at all when it turns out that he is a hero and this brings him problems. She adds that he prefers to just read his books quietly. Madelia looks at the document and says that it is strange. Caroline, with her eyes closed, says that strange people make good magicians, as her teacher always said. She opens her eyes and says that there is one thing. She asks the rector why she is so gloomy today. The rector tells Caroline that she is still as insightful as before. She adds that if Ryan Ludwig caught that thief, then it seems that it is connected with the Dark Church. She conjures up images of hooded men causing a sword to hover over a thief. The thief smiles madly. The professor replies that she is sure not. Madelia asks the professor if she has ever heard her say something stupid. She adds that the Special Affairs Department contacted them first, and they will be here soon. She reports that she has a bad feeling. A bead of sweat runs down Caroline's cheek. Madelia, with a serious expression on her face, tells the professor to be ready. The main character thought that he was told that he was accepted after he missed the exam due to being late the next morning after the chaos. The main character sits on a stone hill, and in front of him stands a man in a brown robe with a hood. The protagonist thought that a professor named Caroline suggested that he pretend that he had passed an additional exam and got on the list of candidates. The professor removes the hood from his head. The protagonist thought that she was worried that extra exams were perceived as a shame for those who failed the regular admission. But for him this was not a problem. The main character has a frightened expression on his face. He thought that being afraid of retaking the exam, he accepted the offer. After that, he stood before the gates of the greatest university, Delayton, where the pinnacles of the sacred empire's intellect gathered. The main character and the professor are standing near many townspeople. The main character thought that he was standing in front of the Delayton gate. The protagonist in white and gold clothes stands near the gate. The main character with a thoughtful look thought that he had never been associated with the school. He remembers sitting in class and thinking that in a past life he learned magic from the head of Osiris, and in this life from his family. He remembers how Aunt Lynn helped him in his studies. He thought that even now he does not feel the need to learn from anyone. But in this life he needs to find what Lista left, because she is waiting for him at the end of this path. The protagonist imagined the image of Lista. He smiles and thought that for now he should improve his magical skills at least to the level of his previous life. Krista stands behind the protagonist and points her finger at him. The main character greets Krista with a dissatisfied expression on his face. The brown-haired girl greets the protagonist back. She is about to thank the protagonist and then tells him to wait. She made an angry expression on her face. She tells the protagonist that she could have done it alone even without his help. Many students gathered around them. One of them calls to see what is happening. Another student reports that this is Krista Warden. Another student says that she is the most popular student in this generation. The main character tells the girl that she is more famous than he thought. The girl's cheeks turn red and she replies that of course it is. She adds that there is even a saying that whoever does not know Krista Warden in their generation is a spy of the Republic. The brown-haired girl puts her hand forward and tells the protagonist that he is a rival whom she recognized, so he can consider himself lucky. The main character put his hand to his temple and thought that he couldn't stand annoying creatures. The brown-haired girl smiles, and the protagonist thought that he seemed to have seen a similar person. The black and gold hooded figure sticks his hand out in front of Rin and asks him if he's new, then reveals that he, as the number 2 candidate for the next dean, will consider the protagonist his rival. The protagonist thought that this brat he met in the tower insisted on being treated like a high school student since she entered the tower first. The girl in the hood raises her index finger up and a fire appears above it. The main character, with a dissatisfied expression on his face, thought that she was so boastful, and he remembers it well. Krista asks the protagonist why he is laughing, and then asks him if he is laughing at her. The main character sighs with a smile on his face. Krista creates a magic rectangle and shouts to the protagonist that if he thinks that what he saw then is all she can do, then he will soon regret it. A bright glow appears in place of the magical figure. A lot of sand appears around Krista and the protagonist. Students nearby are blown away due to wind currents. The main character, with concern on his face, thought why she decided to do this in such a place. Krista, with a smile on her face, got into a fighting stance, and then asks the protagonist if he understood what her true abilities are and if he feels that he wants to give it her all. The main character covers his face with his hand and thought that she didn't seem to care about her surroundings. The main character, with an angry expression on his face, thought that she looked like Giselle, who must have been reincarnated as her. The main character creates a blue magic circle in his hand. He thought that maybe he should put her in her place. A man with blonde hair tied in a ponytail says that this is a dramatic performance, because on one side there is a beginner, and on the other there is a genius prodigy who has passed an additional exam. Krista looks at the blonde with a dissatisfied expression on her face. The main character looks at the blonde with the same dissatisfaction. The blonde says that this is a comparison of extremes. The blonde smiles smugly. Some of the students call him Hubert. Someone from the crowd says that this is Hubert from the Rohuanum School. Another person in the crowd asks if this is the Delayton High School graduate. Krista stands with a serious expression on her face. One of the students says that she heard that he has been competing with Krista for a long time. The brown-haired girl closes her eyes and apologizes because the quality of the audience is too low, and therefore she is not having fun. The blonde tells them to keep going because it's great fun. Krista, with a smile on her face, says that it would be unfortunate if he got caught in her magic and flew away somewhere into the distance, so he should be grateful to her for her attention. Hubert smiles with his eyes closed and says that he is so grateful that tears come to his eyes, and then asks if it is too shameless to open his mouth when he can even handle it. He adds that Krista should know her place, because suddenly she will regret her actions. Krista says that the finalist shouldn't talk like that and why shouldn't he show what he's capable of. Hubert tells the girl that her proud nature has not changed and she will disgrace her family if she continues to live like this. He adds that he almost feels sorry for her. He turns to the protagonist and is surprised, then tells him that he was so insignificant that he didn't even notice he was there. The blonde with a smile on his face asks the protagonist what the brilliant young master was staring at, who was admitted through an additional test, and whether there was something on his face or something bothered the protagonist in his words. The main character says that it's not that it bothers him. He adds that he rather has a question about who this person is acting so self-confidently. Hubert looks at the protagonist with a dissatisfied expression. The main character stands opposite the blonde and asks him if he knows how to use magic at all, because since he is trying to fight, he must be good at magic. The blonde has a surprised expression on his face. The students watch the situation with concern on their faces. Hubert, with his eyes wide open, calls the protagonist a little brat and asks him what he just said. Krista laughs loudly, and the protagonist and the blonde look at her. The girl tells the blonde that he was trampled while showing off to the newcomers, and then adds that if she were in his place, she would be embarrassed to even show her face. Hubert has an angry expression on his face. Krista exclaims that it was a wonderful sight. A woman with dark brown hair opens the door and asks the new people what they are doing here, and then asks them to hurry up and come in. She asks Krista what she is doing here as a freshman representative. She asks her to hurry up and go inside to prepare for the oath. The brown-haired girl rubs her cheek with her index finger. The main character leaves, and the blonde man looks after him. Krista comes into the office and calls Ryan. The protagonist wonders what she needs this time. Krista, with a smile on her face, shows her thumb and shouts that she will leave everything as it is, because there is no time. but next time he should not even think about it, because they will settle everything properly. The protagonist mentally asks her to leave him alone. Students look at the protagonist who put his hand on his head. One of them asks what "will settle" means. Another says that Krista and the brilliant young master cannot even be compared. One of the students asks what it means to not compare, and then adds that Krista will actually not be easy. The brown-haired guy asks the red-haired guy from Reborn High School if he is, and then asks him what he means. The red-haired guy asks him if he knows that this young gentleman was Scalzi's assistant director. He adds that if he sees how strong he is, he will not say such nonsense. A man with red hair stands in front of many students and says that they are now starting the 1388 entrance ceremony at Dayton University. Hubert has his arms crossed and sits with a dissatisfied expression on his face. Among the students there is a gray-haired man. A pink-haired girl with 2 braids rejoices and clenches her hands into fists. Krista raises her hand and says something. The protagonist, with a bored expression on his face, wondered when this would end. Madelia appears in the room. A man with red hair says that now there will be a welcoming speech from the rector to the first-year students. The protagonist has a surprised expression on his face. A pink-haired girl in a hat comes closer to the students. One of the students says that this is the best magician of the empire, Madelia Page. She has a stern look. The students watch what is happening with concern on their faces. One of the students yawns. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek. He thought that this was the greatest magician of the empire, the current head of the Council of Magicians and a direct descendant of the founder of magic, Emitsa Page. The main character looks at the rector with surprise. The protagonist recognized her hair color by looking at her. The protagonist remembers how, as Rin, he fought with someone, concentrating a huge amount of golden energy in his hand. The protagonist thought that this pink hair was genetic. He remembers how a woman with pink hair and a hat with a mouth fought with the protagonist. Madelia tells the students welcome to Dayton. She introduces herself and says that she is the rector of the university. He congratulates all 233 freshmen on their admission, but half of them will not survive to their second year, because they will either be delayed or expelled and therefore will not be able to pass. The students silently listen to the rector. The rector says that out of 117 survivors, only about 60 will move on to the third year, and of these, only half will reach graduation. He adds that this means that fewer than 30 graduates complete the program each year. She spreads her arms to the sides. She says that Dayton is just such a place because it is a place where talents are honed. Beads of sweat run down the students' faces. Rector says they are constantly testing them under the guise of polishing to determine whether they are rough stones that can become jewelry. Concern can be seen on the students' faces. The rector says that Dayton's policy is unlimited competition. She adds that those who fall behind in the competition will not even be eligible to receive a diploma. She raises her hand and tells the students that they will feel this acutely throughout their stay here. She shouts at the students that they must sharpen themselves. Hubert smiles smugly. The rector shouts to the students that they must fight with each other and develop, because Dayton works that way. The man smiles joyfully after the rector's words. Concern can be seen on the face of the pink-haired girl with 2 braids. The rector reports that students must improve until insignificant stones shine with their own brilliance. Krista smiles because of the rector's words. Madelia invites the students to meet here again in 3 years, because then she, as a fellow magician, will welcome them here. The protagonist smiles a little because of the rector's words. The rector with a smile on his face adds that she will wish good luck to each of them. The students silently look at the rector. They start clapping their hands. Many students clap. Madelia leaves the office. The main character closes his eyes and claps. He opens his eyes and thought that he was looking forward to a new meeting. The protagonist looks at the pink-haired girl leaving. Madelia's performance was watched by a man in a red shirt as well as Caroline. The blonde says it's chaotic, but she likes the energy. The man in purple clothes says that energy should correspond to abilities. The blonde answers that it's true. She asks Professor Owen what he thinks. The man replies that he expected this party to be of a high level, but he only sees fools with dung on their heads. Caroline asks the man what he means. Owen says they are all doomed to fail. The main character stands among many students with a piece of paper in his hand. The protagonist stands in front of a building above which there is a stone sculpture in the form of a dragon and asks the faculty building hall of the sleeping dragon if this is it. He looks at the building and says that it is truly majestic. The main character walks along the corridor. He looks at the sign for the office he needs. He goes inside the office. He sits down at his desk and puts a sheet of paper on the table. The curtain at the window rises due to the wind. The main character looks out the window. The main character rests his head on his hand and smiles. Someone in a female voice tells the protagonist that it looks like she is his classmate, and then asks him to take care of him in the future. The protagonist, with a smile on his face, replies that it's good, he will take care. He opens his eyes wide in surprise. Krista raises her hand with a smile on her face and greets the protagonist. The main character covers his face with his hand and thought that even the sky was indifferent. Krista puts her hand to the side and says that to think that the protagonist will have to compete with the best student, Krista Warden, right from the first damage. A pink-haired girl with 2 braids appears near the brown-haired girl, who says that if you loosely translate Miss Krista's words, it was something like "I'm so happy that I'm sitting next to you." The brown-haired woman points her index finger at the protagonist and says that of course she is happy, because from the very beginning she will turn up this guy's arrogant nose. Hubert appears behind the girls and says that this is so amazing. He reports that the daughter of the Panton family is also watching this performance today. He adds that it is enviable that magicians from noble families control 2 or 3 vassal families, and it is a shame that the lady behaves rudely, pointing fingers at others. Krista clenches her hand into a fist. The pink-haired girl tells Hubert that he doesn't understand, because in fact this is part of Miss Krista's charm. She puts her palm to her face and says that even without this, she is still very charming and at least more than someone who is impressive in appearance. Gertrude Panton is from the family of Baron Panton. The pink-haired student says that the water is only pure when the stream is clean. She adds that they both show off in pairs. Krista asks what he is doing, putting aside the main question. The main character put his hand to his forehead and thought that it seemed that he would soon be motion sick. He thought that Pride once asked him something. The protagonist is immersed in memories. Pride asks the protagonist if he ever wanted to go to school. The protagonist replies that no, and the red-haired sorceress says that it is strange. Rin reads the book and says that he is already a 4-star mage, and then asks what else the school can teach him, because it is just a waste of time. The red-haired girl smokes a pipe and calls the protagonist a fool. The girl tells the protagonist that school is not a place where one can study to achieve academic success. Rin asks the red-haired girl why she is studying then. Pride, with a smile on his face, says that for the sake of people. The protagonist, with concern on his face, thought that maybe she was right and school is the place where they learn about people like these. The blonde says goodbye and leaves, and the pink-haired girl holds Krista, who has an angry expression on her face. There is a clock hanging on the wall. Someone enters the room. The protagonist looks at the man who entered the room. Krista sits next to him. A man with gray hair and a beard appears. The main character, looking at him, wondered if it was a gorilla, and then noticed that it was the curator. The students silently watch the curator. The main character thought that there was a strange tension in the air. He asks Krista what's wrong with him. A brown-haired girl asks the protagonist if he doesn't know Owen. The curator looks at the students. He focused on some of them. He sees a bored guy with brown hair and 2 guys with black hair. The curator looks the other way. He sees one student yawning, a guy with freckles, and a guy with brown hair. Owen scratches his cheek with his thumb. The main character is silent with his eyes wide open. The curator says that just think, he will have to manage these pathetic monkeys for a whole year. He adds that he has no motivation. The students look at the curator with concern on their faces. Owen raises the chalk above his hand and says that these monkeys only have dung instead of brains. He asks one of the students where he is looking while he speaks. Chalk from the curator's hand flies towards one of the students. Chalk hits one of the students in the head. Owen carefully examines the students. He looked at someone. Gertrude Panton closes her eyes, a bead of sweat running down her cheek. Concern can be seen on the faces of Krista and Ryan. Owen says it's terrible. He asks the students if they are laughing now, and then adds that they don't know anything. He tells the students that they think that the whole world belongs to them, since they ended up in Delayton. The students look at the curator with concern on their faces. Owen asks his students if they really dream of becoming a court magician of some noble nobleman or living happily by building their own tower of magicians. The curator, with a serious expression on his face, tells the students that if they ever become like this, they will be able to call him master, but they are still monkeys who have barely grown hair, and they still have a whole bunch of things to learn. He asks the students if anyone from the 8 main schools is here. Hubert and the black-haired girl raise their hands. Owen closes his eyes and with a dissatisfied expression on his face says that the worst thing here is they, the fools from the 8 main schools. He tells them that the strange mathematical formulas they present in the name of school traditions are simply amazing. Hubert has a surprised expression on his face. The curator says that he doesn't even expect input from them and asks them just not to interfere. He asks if anyone from the noble families of magicians is here. Krista and the protagonist raise their hands up. The curator, with dissatisfied expressions on his face, calls them truly disgusting. He tells them that they act like they are all-knowing and arrogant without experiencing any difficulties. The brown-haired girl has an angry expression on her face, and the protagonist simply closed his eyes. The curator tells them to go home and first learn to change their clothes on their own, and then come back. The protagonist thought that the curator was a great ape with an unprecedented talent in rhetoric. The main character has a dissatisfied expression on his face. He thought that the curator might be more suited to the role of a cult leader than a magician. Owen says that his task for this year is to make them at least useful magicians who will be even better than monkeys. He says that there is no place here for those who are worse than a monkey, because everyone who fails will be thrown out. He looks at the students and adds that they should at least try to evolve into humans. He places his hand on the table. He asks the student why he doesn't answer. Beads of sweat are running down the faces of the green-haired guy and the girl with dark brown hair. Owen asks the student why he isn't paying attention. He asks the red-haired student if he can be taught how to answer. He asks if he is scary. The red-haired guy tells the curator that he is not scary. Does the student's supervisor really think that he is flexible? Owen reports that they will now have a test. Krista and the protagonist became wary. The curator says that they and the one next to them will form teams of 2 for the test. The curator says that the last team will be eliminated. Hubert listens to the words of the curator with a smile on his face. Owen gives off a red aura. He tells the disciples that they should keep this in mind. The students look at each other with concern on their faces. Gertrude Panton's cheeks turned red. One of the students asks whether it is really that easy to become expelled. Another student says that he has not heard such a thing. Hubert lowered his gaze. Another student says that he is probably saying this to scare them. The main character watches the teacher. Owen writes with chalk on a blackboard. He hits the board with his fist. He says that only 20 minutes are given and from now on they need to solve this problem on the paper that is on their table, and then they should submit it. The curator drew text and 2 fan symbols with runes on the board. With a stern expression, he announces that those who cannot solve it in this time, and those who pass it last, will be expelled, as promised. He put his hand to the side and asked the students why they were staring at him. He shouts that the exam has already started. He adds that the task is solved in pairs. The purple-haired girl and the brown-haired guy look at each other. The curator shouts that even monkeys can solve 2-star magic if they gather their strength. The students are sorting through the sheets of paper on their desks. The main character looks at Krista, who is sitting next to him. The brown-haired girl props up her chin and says that the magic circle is shaped like 2 layers of a fan, and then adds that the runes to be drawn are Ju and Yu. She thought about what formula she could use. A brown-haired girl writes on a piece of paper and asks the protagonist to hurry up and help her, and also to make a basic formula using matrices, and then find the answer using a cubic function. The main character touches his cheek and with a surprised look asks the girl if she is one of those who suffers unnecessarily. Krista shouts to the protagonist that he needs to stop talking and he should start writing. Krista remembers someone telling her that the Warden family was finished. She remembers standing among her family members. Someone told her that both the eldest and youngest daughters are the same. Krista watches the hooded woman. She is reading a book around the corner while the other girls are playing with a ball. Someone puts a hand on the brown-haired girl's shoulder and then tells her that he is counting on her because she is the only one who can revive their family. Krista has a surprised expression on her face. Currently, she is writing something on a piece of paper with a dissatisfied expression on her face. She says she has to be the best at everything. The main character is silent and thought that she had to bear a heavy burden. A brown-haired girl with an angry expression on her face asks the protagonist what he is looking at and whether he found the answer from the function. She takes a sheet of paper with the task and says that now all that remains is to solve it. The wind blows from the window on Krista and the protagonist. The brown-haired girl wonders why this happened now. The main character raises his hand and concentrates magical energy in his hand. A brown-haired girl lays out paper. The assignment sheet is wrinkled and slightly torn. The main character closes the window using magic. Krista opens her eyes wide. A brown-haired girl tears up a sheet of paper with a task. Owen tells the girls and the protagonist to keep quiet, and then asks them if they can't do calculations without making noise. Krista apologizes to the curator. The brown-haired girl says that everything is ruined and that she will have to start all over again. The protagonist's eyes turn red and he has activated Bel Sidious. He looks at Krista's hand, which is writing on a piece of paper. A stream of blue energy appears near her. The flow of energy rises upward. He flies up to Hubert. The protagonist watches him and thought that the 8 main schools were just playing childish pranks. The blonde man writes on a piece of paper with a smile on his face. The protagonist thought that the Rohirrim school is a school of wind and their secret art has neither sound nor color, which means that the magic used is wind manipulation. The protagonist imagines the image of a man in a green robe with a golden process, from whose hand a sinuous stream of air emanates. Krista asks the protagonist to give her his paper. The main character is distracted by a girl. The brown-haired girl puts her hand forward and, with a dissatisfied expression on her face, tells the protagonist to quickly rewrite. She asks the protagonist what he is doing. The protagonist sees the girl take a piece of paper from him. Krista writes on a piece of paper and a bead of sweat runs down her cheek. She thought that the time was limited to 8 minutes and she already had a solution process in her head. She adds that she can do it in 8 minutes. The main character takes a piece of paper from the girl. With a dissatisfied expression on her face, she asks him what he is doing. The protagonist replies that this is impossible, because they cannot finish on time using this method. Krista asks the protagonist how he can know without trying. The main character sighs and tells the girl that she still won't understand. She calls the protagonist small with an angry expression on her face. The main character with a serious expression on his face says that the task is doable. The solution is just too difficult for her. Ryan picks up her pencil. He begins to write very quickly on a piece of paper. He wrote the solution in a matter of seconds. He tells the girl that if she burns out so easily, she won't be able to be a magician. Krista has a surprised expression on her face. The main character sighs and tells the girl to remember that a strong magician must remain calm at all times. The protagonist remembers how the monster grabbed the magician's hat. He thought that in the world where he lived, even 8 minutes was not enough. A many-eyed monster with sharp teeth bit off the head of a magician in a hat. Lista hits the monster and breaks its teeth. The main character sees the magician's head falling to the ground. He thought that the price for a few seconds of delay was not just exclusion, but death. The main character has a shocked expression on his face. Half of the magician's head lies in front of him. The main character tells the girl that this time he will take the initiative, and she just needs to help. A drop of sweat runs down the girl's cheek. With a serious expression on his face, he asks the girl not to detain them. Someone stops writing. He gets up from his chair. Hubert, with a smile on his face, and the black-haired girl go to the curator. The blonde puts forward his hand with the written assignment and asks the curator to evaluate it. Owen reads the contents of the sheet. He concentrates blue energy into his hand. The fan symbols on the sheet begin to glow green. A lot of smoke comes out of a piece of paper. Owen says that the G and U runes work correctly, and considering that they did it before everyone else, that's not bad. A smiling blonde and a black-haired girl close their eyes. The curator asks students not to be too self-confident, because this is not great. Hubert opens his eyes. The curator turns away and says that it only takes 2 minutes to solve such a problem. He reports that this is why the grade is C. The black-haired girl and the blonde man have surprised expressions on their faces. Hubert, with a nervous smile on his face, says that he cannot accept this. He adds that he solved it first in class, and the mathematical formula is perfect, and then asks what the reason is. The curator asks the guy from the Rohirrim Wind School to stop fooling around. The blonde has a surprised expression on his face. Owen tells the guy that he knows better why he got a C, and then calls him a monkey. The blonde opened his eyes wide. The black-haired girl asks the curator what he is trying to say. The protagonist stands behind her. The main character asks the black-haired girl if she could step aside. Krista stands behind him. The black-haired student says that the answer sheet of the brown-haired girl and the protagonist was torn. Another student replies that he said so. Hubert turns around and asks if they also met. Owen looks at the protagonist. The main character asks to evaluate their answers. The professor closes the book he was reading with a smile on his face. He asks them if they are done, and then tells them that this is really unpleasant. He adds that he was delighted at the thought of expelling these newcomers from the magical family. Krista puts forward her hand with a sheet of paper, and the protagonist tells the professor that if a magician cannot use magic just because the wind is blowing, then he cannot call himself a magician. Owen takes the task sheet and tells the protagonist that he likes his spirit, but it doesn't compare to his mother's wart. Drops of sweat run down the faces of Hubert and the black-haired girl. The professor took a closer look at the assignment sheet. He sees a magic circle on the sheet, which is different from what he suggested. He says that one magical figure is shaped like a fan, and the other is drawn as a circle. He asks the main character why he did this. The protagonist replies that the G rune works well with the magic of the water attribute, and based on this, he simplified the mathematical formula for the operation of this rune. The protagonist tells the curator that if a person can solve the rune's requirements using a first-order equation, the activation time will speed up. Professor Owen responds that this is something that is not even taught in high school classes, but he is well aware of it. The main character says that their high school has a strange program. Krista is dizzy with so much information. The main character says that it cannot be said that a magician uses magic correctly until he completely masters the runes. He adds that taking this into account, he changed the shape of the magic circle. Owen looks at the assignment sheet with a thoughtful look. The professor thought that the protagonist, based on his understanding of the runes, sought to reduce the activation time. He says it's smart, but whether the spell will activate correctly is another story. The main character closes his eyes and says that this is true. The protagonist tells the professor to check it himself. The professor and the protagonist are both smiling. Owen puts his hand forward and shouts that he can't wait to see him fail. The professor puts his hand forward and concentrates magic in it, and then shouts that he cannot wait to see the protagonist fail. He asks the protagonist if he knew that if you make a magic circle with a double attribute, the math to solve you will become several times more difficult. The brown-haired girl watches what is happening with a worried expression on her face. A bright glow emanates from a sheet of paper. The professor shouts that he will see if this is skill or just a trick. The bright glow intensifies many times over. The professor has a surprised expression on his face. A powerful air flow is created above them. It's spinning. The magic turns white and streams of energy fly in different directions. The white energy disappears and a bright golden glow appears. It starts to rain. The professor continues to look at what is happening with surprise. Krista opened her eyes wide in surprise. Hubert and the black-haired girl also watch what is happening in surprise. The rest of the students look up in surprise in the same way. The main character sees a bright magical glow above him from which drops of water are pouring. Owen claps his hands. He reports that he has been teaching for 13 years and has seen many geniuses. The protagonist and Krista look at the professor. The professor reports that they are the first to give him such an answer. The students listen to the professor's words with surprise on their faces. Owen says this answer deserves an S, which he's never given to such a trivial quiz before. The black-haired girl and Hubert listen to the professor's words with serious expressions on their faces. The brown-haired girl opened her eyes wide in surprise. The main character with his eyes closed says that this is a high rating. Krista is shaking with excitement. She clenches her hands into fists with a joyful expression on her face and shouts out thanks. She raises her fists up, her cheeks flushed with joy. The protagonist smiles a little. The professor smiles a little too. He tells them in a creepy voice that they need to go back to their seats, or do they really want him to lower his grade? Krista apologizes to the professor. Owen tells the blonde and black-haired girl that the same goes for them. He adds that the assessment is over and they need to quietly return to their places. A brown-haired girl with a smile on her face walks near Hubert. The blonde looks at the girl with a dissatisfied expression on his face. The protagonist approaches the blonde. He looks at him with a creepy look. Hubert asks the protagonist if he has anything to say. Owen tells the students not to force him to repeat themselves unless they want to receive a disciplinary reprimand. The main character looks at the blonde with a dissatisfied expression on his face. The blonde looks at the protagonist with the same look. The main character passes by the blonde and tells him that next time it will be different. The school building is illuminated by sunlight. Anyway, the students who took the symbols test survived their first lesson while listening to Professor Owen's harsh criticism. Owen shows the text written on the board. A blonde man and a black-haired girl are sitting with serious expressions on their faces. The professor's chalk hits the guy sitting next to Gertrude Panton. The main character explains the theory to a brown-haired girl who sits next to him with a bored look. He asks her if she is not listening. The main character wondered why she behaved this way. The professor says that's all for today. He looks at the tired students and asks what those faces are and whether it was too hard for them. He tells the students not to worry because next time he will show them something even more difficult. The students have desperate expressions on their faces. The teacher says that those who fail will be left behind, so they need to hammer today's lesson into their heads as if their lives depend on it. Sunlight falls on the school building. The hands on the wall clock move. Krista addresses the protagonist. The main character asks her what she needs. The girl says that she wants to say something regarding what happened earlier. She thanks the main character. The protagonist has a calm expression on his face. The main character tells the brown-haired girl that her voice is too quiet and he can't hear her. She asks her if she can repeat it properly. The girl with an angry expression on her face screams at the protagonist to stop apologizing to her. Krista, with an angry expression on her face, shouts that she will definitely return the favor next time, so the protagonist should stop being impudent. She adds that they are rivals with him. With reddened eyes, she shouts to the protagonist that they helped each other only this time. Some of the students say that this cannot be. Krista continues to scream at the protagonist. Someone asks the other students if they heard Owen give an S grade. Another student says that there is no way that Gorilla did that. The students discuss Krista, the protagonist, and Hubert's grades while the brown-haired girl yells at the protagonist. The main character reacts to her words with a dissatisfied expression on his face. The students notice that Krista and that genius were on the same team. The next day, nearby there are 2 brown towers, on each of which there are sculptures of dragons. The main character with a sheet of paper in his hand says that Krista Warden herself really said that she would return it to him at the next meeting. He asks what floor is the hostel on. The brown-haired girl tells the protagonist that she is the highest among the freshmen. She asks him if he has forgotten that he is the best in the class, and then reminds the protagonist that she told him not to show off. The main character tells the girl that she started it herself, and then asks her if she thinks her promises are too frivolous. Krista makes an angry expression on her face. She leaves and shouts that she is looking forward to it. Gertrude Panton stands between her and the protagonist. The main character stands with his eyes closed. He walks among many disciples. One of the students says to look there. A green-haired student asks another student if the eldest son of the Ludwig family is on the first floor. Another teacher asks the green-haired student not to talk nonsense, and then asks him if he would have arrived on time if he had been given a room next to Krista. The green-haired guy tells his interlocutor that he is joking, and then says that with such skills he would pass a regular exam. He asks why take the extra one. The main character walks with a serious expression on his face. He approaches the wooden door and wonders if this is the same place. He puts forward his hand, in which he holds a necklace with a red stone. The wooden door opens by itself. The main character looks inside and notices that this is a single room. Inside there is a work desk with a chair, as well as bookshelves. The main character approaches the table and says that it reminds him of his stay in the magic tower. He looks out the window and thought that even in a past life he sat in such a room, focusing only on studying magic. The protagonist remembers how he was sitting on a chair and Lista was saying something to him. The main character shakes his head from side to side. He falls onto his bed. The main character covers his eye with his hand. He looks at his palm and thought that there is nothing else here except the first lesson. He adds that he could better infiltrate the Vatican and examine his remains, but infiltrating with such a personality and abilities would be too difficult. The protagonist puts his hand forward and concentrates red energy in it. 3 red magic triangles appear near his hand. The main character looks carefully at the magic he has created. 3 red triangles are combined into a single hole. The main character clenched his fingers and the spell disappeared. The main character thought that it looked like 4-star magic was still too much for him. He opens his eyes wide. A bird lands on the windowsill and the protagonist gets out of bed. He looks at her. There is a bag tied to the owl's paw. The main character strokes the owl's head and takes a box out of the bag. The protagonist waves goodbye to the flying owl. He looks at the box. There is text and the number 1388 written on it. The main character opens the box and thought that it did not have the name of the sender, and then wonders if his father sent it. The main character sees a blue book inside. He takes 2 books out of the box. He opened his eyes wide because he noticed that one of them was pretty shabby. He picks up a worn book. He notices that this is a diary that he entrusted to Lista. He remembers how she stood with him in her arms. The main character holds a diary in both hands. He senses something and wonders who it is. The main character turns around and asks who is there. The main character looks out the window and wonders who sent it. The main character looks out of the window. A bead of sweat runs down his cheek and he wonders if anyone knows his identity. Magic training complex on the campus Battle Dragon Field. A sand spike hits a monster with wings. Someone in a female voice announces that there are 30 seconds left to reach the goal. Gertrude announces that there are 30 seconds left to the goal. Many students are watching something. 20 seconds left. Krista's sand creatures fight black and red winged monsters, as well as a worm monster. Gertrude is standing nearby. She announces that there are 15 seconds left, and then asks the brown-haired girl if something good has happened. Krista jumped off the ground and asked the pink-haired girl why she thought that. One sand creature attacks the dark-winged monster, and another sand creature attacks the green-winged monster. The pink-haired girl with her eyes closed says that there are 10 seconds left and tells Krista that she seems to be more excited than usual today. The brown-haired girl asks Gertrude what she means. The pink-haired student opens her eyes and says that there are 5 seconds left, and then asks if it is because she met Lord Ryan. She says that she is wondering what happened between them. Krista, with a confused look on her face, asks what Gertrude means. She screams that nothing happened and creates a powerful cloud of golden energy using a magic square. He shouts that he's just annoyed that she's seeing that annoying face again today. She exclaims that she relieves stress while working out. Gertrude thought with a smile on her face that Krista would not deceive anyone with her behavior. She thought that it seemed like the rumors about Ryan helping her during the exam were true. The brown-haired girl moves her hand to the side and makes an angry expression on her face. The pink-haired girl with flushed cheeks thought that surprisingly, Ryan Ludwig, whom she met as a child at a family meeting, was not like that. He announces that there are 0 seconds left and says that it is over, after which Krista growls loudly. The pink-haired girl asks to remove the golem. The central hall of the student dormitory. Hubert walks down the corridor. One of the students tells the blonde boy, "Welcome, loser with a C grade." The students are watching them. Hubert calls the guy who turned to him Logan and tells him that if he continues in the same spirit, he may die. Graduate student at Rohunam School, Hubert. The man with gray hair tells Hubert to calm down, and then adds that he is so scared that he is ready to wet himself. He adds that he heard that someone got a C today and almost died laughing. Postgraduate student at Chehak School, Logan. A guy with gray hair sits on a chair and says that besides, Krista received an S rating even with sandbags. Hubert leaves silently. The gray-haired guy asks the blonde if he's in the group with that genius boy, what he really is, and if he's just a coward, as they say in rumors, even if he's better than the blonde. The blonde guy tells Logan that it's none of his business and then calls him a muscular fool. With an angry expression on his face, he asks the gray-haired guy if he really wants to challenge him. Logan says with a serious look on his face, "Come on." The blonde turns to the gray-haired man. The red-haired girl with a book in her hands asks the guys to turn. She tells them that they are not the only ones here. The guys look at the red-haired girl. Logan sighs and tells the red-haired girl named Lily that it was just a joke. The girl's gaze is directed to the book. Rivendell School graduate student, Lillian. Logan asks the girl if she wants to join his strategy to destroy Krista and this genius. A red-haired girl with a deadpan gaze tells Logan that this is why his magical achievements are not growing, because he is always up to senseless pranks. She asks what is the benefit of bullying the weak, even if it is Krista. The gray-haired guy replies that he is joking. The blonde turns around and says that he will destroy them himself. As he leaves, he tells Logan that if he touches them carelessly, he himself will go down first. The evening sky is visible outside the windows. The blonde man left the room and called the gray-haired guy a fool. He looks up. He hit the wall with his fist. With an angry expression on his face, he wondered what exactly Ryan Ludwig was doing. He gritted his teeth in anger and thought that the protagonist really worked for 3 years under Professor Scalzi as an assistant, chosen not by blood ties, but by skill. He adds that it cannot be that this is a guy who could not even get a single rank. The main character reads a book while sitting on his bed. He turns the pages and says that the first part is about Rin's life, the second part is about the magic and fighting styles he used. He closes the book and thought that this is incomprehensible, because even if someone knows his identity, the question remains of how exactly he could find out. The main character put the book to his chin and closed his eyes. He wondered why they still hadn't contacted him, if anyone knew. He opens his eyes and is silent for a while. He looked at his watch and said that it was already 23, so it was better to turn off the lights before the duty officer arrived. He uses the switch to turn off the light. He took a closer look at the diary. He remembered Lista, who kept this diary. He looks at it for a while. He approaches the table with a diary in his hands. He opens the diary. A blue butterfly flies out of the diary. The diary flies away from the protagonist. The main character has a surprised expression on his face. He looks at the butterfly and wonders if this is the Rudian he created in a past life. The protagonist, with a wary expression on his face, thought no, because he was twice as big and much darker than before. He puts his hand forward and thought that even if this is so, how could he survive for 300 years? He wonders whose magical power it is and for what purpose it was used. The protagonist remembers Pride, Lista and Kai's. Rudian flew onto the protagonist's hand. The protagonist receives a notification from Rudian with information that progress in researching unique magic, equal to 37%, can be continued. The protagonist opened his eyes wide in surprise. A notification appears in front of the protagonist with a lot of text written on it. The protagonist reads the text that appeared in front of him. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek, and he thought that this is what he researched in a past life in order to reach the level of a sage. The main character thought that these were 12 original runes that he tested in real battles 300 years ago. He adds that he thought they all failed, but progress is 37%. Rudian further looks through the window that Rudian created. He thought that it was impossible for a 4-star magic like Rudian to check the progress of a 6-star magic. But if this was true, then he had not made a mistake in his path. Light lines appear on the protagonist's face. The main character smiles. There is a malicious smile on his face. The protagonist let Rudian go and thought that if he continues in the same spirit, he will be able to reach the truth. Rudian is on the bed, and the protagonist is reading the text and thought that this was a sudden appearance of hope. The main character, with a satisfied expression on his face, continues to scroll through the window with the text. Rudian glows bright blue. The protagonist thought that this made him instantly forget about the sender of the book. Being carried away by Rudian, this thought disappeared from his mind in an instant. The main character puts on a white uniform. He takes the blue book with him and wonders if he should start researching. The main character leaves his room. The main character walks under a canopy. It is raining outside. Unlike the north, where it gets cool when it rains, the southern regions remain warm even when it rains due to the influence of the Badantio mountain range. The main character hides a book under his clothes. He's walking right in the rain. The main character enters the room. Someone in a female voice asks him if she understood correctly that he needed a place where he could practice magic. The green-haired girl crossed her arms and said that battlefield is perfect for this and she will conduct it. According to the dorm leader, the battlefield is a place to train powerful magic with a wide range. There is a huge amount of fire around the protagonist and the green-haired girl. Surrounded by high-level magic to prevent and repair damage, one can cast spells mindlessly without caring about the surroundings. The green-haired girl asks the protagonist to simply touch the entrance with her apprentice ring to enter. The main character points his finger with the ring forward. The wall of fire in front of him disappears. A voice tells the protagonist welcome to the battlefield and calls him the 1388th student, Ryan Ludwig. He adds that all 30 rooms are currently available. A green-haired girl with closed eyes tells the main character not to be shy about using them. The main character says that he will use the nearest room at number 15. The voice reports that the information has been confirmed. The main character stands in the middle of the space, which is fenced with red lines. He asks to give him a target and adds that it must be strong. A circle appears in front of the main character, which glows brightly. A green target in the form of a golem appears on the circle. The main character takes out his book. The protagonist looks at the target and says that he is at the level of 2-star magic, which is not bad. The main character opens the blue book and looks into it. He reads that the U rune gives molecules the ability to wriggle. If this rune is engraved on flame magic, the coals will wriggle and burn for a long time. The main character closes the book and thought that it was worth starting with this rune. The protagonist materializes a magic triangle in his hand. He engraved the U rune on it. The rune on the triangle glows brightly. The protagonist's spell disappears. It completely disappeared. The main character clenched his hand into a fist and with an angry expression on his face shouts that it seems that 1-star magic is not working. The protagonist's fist glows brightly. A circle appears in front of his palm, inside which there are 3 triangles. The triangles begin to spin. The triangles spin quickly in a circle. The main character is completely focused on the spell. A powerful explosion occurs behind him. Many red lights appear. Lights appear near the green target. The main character looks at the target with a serious expression on his face. Hubert looks at the protagonist and asks what kind of garbage magic is this. With a serious expression on his face, he thought that the protagonist couldn't even use 1-star magic correctly. He thought that it was a characteristic of flame magic to be noisy, but judging by how quietly it worked, it seemed like he was still in the beginning stages. The magician girl creates a powerful flame in front of her. The blonde thought with a smile on his face that the rumors that he was Scalzi's assistant seemed to be false. The target in front of the protagonist glows brightly with a bright light. The target continues to glow, nothing else happens. A large crack appears on the target. He falls to the ground. The main character sighs and says that he barely succeeded. The protagonist thought that the flames with black U penetrated the target's body. The target was torn apart from the inside. The protagonist thought that this was the intended effect, but it took 30 seconds to melt the 2-legged sandstone golem. The protagonist rests his chin with a thoughtful look and wonders whether the rune needs to be modified, then adds that no, because perhaps this is a problem of mathematical theory. The main character smiles. With reddened cheeks, he thought that they still had a lot of time to sort this out. The main character thought that no matter how much he confused, he could solve this problem. He adds that he never thought magical research could be so exciting. The main character sits near Rudian and reads the notifications. According to the notification from Rudian, the mechanic theory has been restored and the U rune has been changed. The main character rests his chin and thought that Rudian not only detects magic nearby, but also sums up and reports on the research carried out during the day. The protagonist focused his attention on something. He reads the notice, which says that the protagonist can continue to progress in the research of unique magic depending on environmental conditions. Progress is 37.1%. The main character with a thoughtful look thought that progress had increased by 0.1% and wondered whether the mathematical theory had improved or the rune had become more perfect. He adds that maybe there is value in such training. The main character stretches and thought that there is no need to go deeper into thoughts, and then says that there is still a lot of time. He was blown away by a stream of air and he thought what was happening. Hubert materialized a magical figure in the form of a fan in his hand. With his hands holding magical fans, streams of wind emanate. The protagonist thought that this was just a novice magician from the Rohirrim school. 3 golems in the form of spherical monsters with wings fly above the blonde man. One of the golems rushes towards the blonde. Hubert concentrates green energy in his hand. He cuts the golem into many pieces. Other golems are about to attack him from behind. The blonde turns back and points his hands at his enemies. He clenches his hand into a fist. The other 2 golems are cut by a powerful blast of wind. The main character looks at the fighting blonde and thought that he was not bad. At least it turned out well. The blonde moves his hand and the wind swirls behind it. Hubert points his hand forward. Air currents circulate near it. The protagonist looked skeptically and thought that something was wrong here. Hubert grumbles with a serious expression on his face. Owen says that the procedure required to cast magic is divided into 3 stages. The first stage is the creation of the magic circle, the second stage is the engraving of the rune, and the third stage requires mathematical calculations. He points to the board. He tells the students that many average magicians experience difficulties with the third stage, mathematical calculations, and if at some stage an error is made in the calculations, a disaster will occur. He adds that therefore, to ensure that no one turns to coal or shatters into fragments, the magician Rin created a mathematical formula known as Rin discriminant. He tells the students that he will give them an example and they must use Rin discriminant to solve it. The professor opens the lid of his pocket watch and says that this might be too much for their tiny brains to handle, so he will be generous and give them 10 minutes. He adds that this formula is designed to be super easy for idiots like them and there shouldn't be any fools who can't solve it. The main character looks at a piece of paper. He wonders who gave this formula. He imagines Kai's, Pride and Lista and then thought that they didn't even know about his formula and barely knew how to add and subtract, so they couldn't learn it. The main character realized something. He thought there was one person who came to mind. Someone is watching the Lista group from behind a tree. The protagonist thought that this was that annoying child who proclaimed himself his student, and directly followed on his heels. The girl behind the tree wearing a bamboo hat is Tirena. He remembers her cold look and thought that she really passed this formula off as something he had invented. He adds that this is impossible, because it was more than 300 years ago. The protagonist, with a thoughtful look, wonders who it could be. Krista touches the protagonist with her finger. The main character asks the girl if she really didn't understand something. Krista asks what this nonsense is with a displeased expression on her face, and then shouts that she is a great genius, Krista Warden. She adds that he and others like him are lower than her and stupider. The professor looks at Krista with an angry expression. She apologizes and says that she will no longer talk irrelevantly. The main character asks the girl what she needs. She hands the main character a wooden box. The protagonist asks what it is, and the girl replies that it's a cookie. Krista, with reddened cheeks, says that she baked these cookies because she had some time left after her magic training. She tells the protagonist that this is to repay a debt. The main character opens the box and thanks the girl, and then tells her that she is more diligent than he thought. He opened the box and sees coals inside it. The brown-haired girl says something with a joyful expression on her face. The main character covers his face and wonders if this is a cookie. The main character asks the girl if these are really cookies, and the girl answers yes. The protagonist asks her if she really used dirt instead of flour, and the girl exclaims that they are real. Krista screams at the protagonist, and the main character looks closely at his hand. The brown-haired student says he can't believe it was so easy, because Lin really was a genius. Chalk flies at the brown-haired girl and hits the piece of paper she was covering with. One of the students says that if we are talking about contribution to the magical world, then the protagonist is simply a god. Smoke is coming from the Krista paper sheet. The protagonist's cheeks turned red. One of the students asks if it could be that he was an angel sent by God. The green-haired girl says that it is worth talking about the meaning, and then adds that he may be the reincarnation of a great sage, but not a god or an angel. The guy with brown hair tells the girl that he is right. A student with burgundy hair asks what makes them different. The brown-haired guy says it probably has to do with the structure of their brains. The guy with burgundy hair says that he could freely use any magic, and then adds that he is so jealous. The main character covers his face with his hand out of embarrassment and mentally asks the students to stop. Krista wonders why the protagonist's face is red. She looks at him and thinks that he is really so shy because of a few cookies. She thought with a smile on her face that he was so proud, but he blushed because of the cookies. Owen stands next to her. He shouts at her that for a monkey who doesn't even work in class, she knows how to protect herself. He asks her if she is interested in attending special classes. The girl with a frightened expression on her face replies that no. Pigeons fly not far from the bell. The professor tells the students to turn in their answers, and then informs them that this will be the end of today's lesson. Fourth period of study, attending club classes. Krista asks the protagonist which club he is going to join. She reports that she will definitely join the magical volleyball club, because streams of the magical kind are obliged to maintain dignity while playing magical volleyball. The main character looks at a piece of paper and asks if this is true. Krista notes that the protagonist didn't know this. The main character asks what magical volleyball has to do with dignity. The girl begins to speak, and the protagonist interrupts her. Krista screams and asks the protagonist why he starts asking, only to cut her off. The students are dressed in various costumes. Someone is wearing a black robe, and someone is wearing deer antlers. The main character tells the girl that he will not rush and look around, so they will see each other later. The brown-haired girl asks the protagonist to wait. At Delayton there are various clubs designed for exchange of experience and competition between students. Clubs were created for this purpose. Two people in armor fight with melee weapons. Combat Magic Club. Gertrude Panton materializes a small fiery bird. The guy behind her is working with a mortar and pestle. Fire Attributes Magic Club. Many students gathered around the burning effigy. Festival Magic Club. Clubs are created by students united by common goals or motives and receive funding for activities after approval by the advising professor. Caroline looks at a piece of paper. This gives everyone the opportunity to devote themselves to research outside of class. The main character looks around and thought that there are many interesting places here, so he should take a good look around. But because of Krista, he is distracted and therefore cannot concentrate. Krista, with a dissatisfied expression on her face, asks the protagonist to listen to what she says. She follows the protagonist and asks that she really didn't tell him that the magical family should join the magical volleyball club. The protagonist replies that he didn't hear that, and even if that's true, it's not a problem. The brown-haired girl asks the protagonist why not. The main character looks at a piece of paper and says that his father will not interfere wherever he goes. Gertrude appears and tells Krista that this can't happen. She tells the protagonist that for the sake of the honor of the magical family, he must join the magical volleyball club. The main character asks if this is not necessary. He thought what would be the point of spending time at the club if that were the case. The main character looks at the flyer with a smile on his face and says that the Fine Arts Magic Club seems more interesting to him, and also this local development magic club. The main character, reading the leaflet, thought that in those days people clung to survival, but when the world became calm, everyone was gradually able to do what they liked. The protagonist remembers how he, as Rin, heard that Lista said that when Rin grows up, peace will surely come. Will become prosperous. Lista sits on a rock by the fire and says that she hopes Rin can protect these lives. Gertrude waves her hand at the protagonist and asks him if he heard what she said. The girl asks the main character where he is going. The main character squeezes the leaflet and says that he is going to look into the local development magic club. The pink-haired girl with bewilderment on her face wondered if the protagonist really didn't know that magical volleyball was an integral part of the social gatherings of high-ranking magicians. She sighs and says that the glory of the Ludwig family, which has been rivaling the Page family for over 100 years, may end with Lord Rhine. She realized something. She clenched her hand and thought that the eldest daughter Page had disappeared after a certain event, and if the Ludwig family also lost heart, then her time had come. She smiles and thought that yes, now a new era begins under the leadership of Lady Krista. With a joyful expression on her face, she clenches her hand into a fist and turns to the brown-haired girl. She discovers that the brown-haired girl has gone somewhere. She stands silently for a while. Gertrude, with a misunderstanding on her face, thought that he really followed Lord Rhine. There are many students on the club premises. Krista says that she was just wondering what the local magical development club was like. The main character responds with the word okay. The girl follows the protagonist and tells him that she definitely did not follow him, and then asks him if he is listening to her, and the protagonist replies that he understands. The main character finds the right door. He looks at the sign above the door and wonders if this is the place. The main character reaches out to the handle. Someone from inside screamingly asks how he can accept such ridiculous conditions. Krista has a surprised expression on her face, and the main character opens the door. They look into the office. Logan crosses his arms and tells the man in black that the strong take all, and then asks if that's not the rule of the Dilaton Club. The gray-haired guy tells his interlocutor that this room will be useful to them, so they need to give it back. The main character asks Krista who it is. The brown-haired girl asks the protagonist if he really doesn't know, and then reveals that this is Logan, a junior member of the Chehak school. The main character asks what kind of school Chehak is. The brown-haired girl asks the protagonist what he knows, and then says that this is a school that specializes in graduating magicians with an emphasis on martial arts. Logan asks the guy with glasses and a black shirt if they really have to decide everything with a duel, and if he has the courage to fight with the elders. He asks why they even need such a ridiculous club and who even recognizes it. Krista tells the protagonist that this happens often, because in order to conduct club activities, you need a room. Two students are behind the protagonist and the girls are looking at them. Logan and the guy with glasses continue talking. The brown-haired girl says that if you want to create a club when there are no free rooms, you will have to take the premises of another club. The main character asks the girl if this really needs to be done using a magic duel. Krista, with a smile on her face, replies that the protagonist answered correctly, because this is a clear and convincing method. The main character replies that this is true. Krista asks the protagonist if he would like to join, and the protagonist replies that he hates annoying things. The guy with the glasses shouts that the 8 great schools, may not realize it, but learning mathematics or academic success is not the only reason for the existence of magic. Logan asks what else there is. The guy with glasses clenches his hand into a fist and says that it is true that academic achievements led to the development of magic, but agriculture and relief are areas where magic was not used. Logan asks if that's true with a small smile on his face. The guy with glasses shouts that if they could find a way to use magic, they could easily solve problems like poverty. The main character and Krista listen to the guy's words. The guy with glasses says no, they could definitely solve them. The guy with glasses points his index finger at Logan and tells him that the high school students created this club to make this happen. He adds that even now, thinking about the people who are having a hard time, he absolutely cannot give the club to them. Logan made an annoyed expression on his face. The main character watches them carefully. The gray-haired guy laughs and asks the guy with glasses if he is serious, and then adds that if it were possible, then the archmages and sages would have already done it. He grabs the guy with glasses by his clothes. He lifts him above himself and asks why all this talk, because he can't even hold the club against a newcomer. With a malicious smile, he asks if these senior students have ever given a result and if anything has changed. A drop of sweat runs down the cheek of a guy with glasses. Logan screams and asks him if he really believes that such pathetic research left behind by these worthless people can change the world. He tells the guy with glasses that he doesn't even dare to fight with magic. He must think it's nothing. The main character goes to them. Logan says that this is so offensive and that instead of a stranger, it is better to help him, the person who is right in front of him. The guy with glasses who is being held in the air screams that he can't do it. The gray-haired guy tells him that he can't seem to open his eyes normally, and then asks him if he really just woke up. The guy with glasses clenched his teeth. Logan asks him if he's fully awake, and then adds that there's nothing to be done. He raises his hand and is about to throw the guy with a scream that will help him open his eyes. Golden energy hits the bully's hand and he lets go of the guy with glasses. The gray-haired student opened his eyes wide. The main character asks Logan if he should arrange a magical duel with him. The gray-haired guy turns to the protagonist. Smoke comes from the protagonist's finger. He says he just joined the club. The sun is shining brightly in the sky. A notification appears from Rudian with information that the progress of research into unique magic in the surrounding space can be continued. The window of the protagonist's room is closed. Rudian, who is on the diary, shows that the level of progress is 37.9%. The protagonist asks if magic really can do anything. There is a magic circle in front of the hand. The protagonist thought that it wasn't that everything was possible, there was a lot that they couldn't do. He thought that if they could create an oasis right in the middle of the desert, then they could help travelers who were looking for water. Pride jumps into the pond while Lista and Kai's watch from the side. The main character leans on a stone and reads a book. Lista, with a smile on her face, asks the protagonist if she can ask him something, and the protagonist asks him what. The girl asks the protagonist if he can create for her several spells that everyone can learn and easily use. A guy with glasses sits on his knees and looks at the protagonist. The protagonist remembers that Lista said that she needed spells that would help people in trouble and make their lives a little easier. The guy in the black shirt adjusts his glasses. Logan looks at the protagonist with an angry expression on his face. The protagonist remembers that Lista told Rin to create them with her own hands. The main character looks at the gray-haired guy with a stern expression on his face. Logan, with a smile on his face, asks the protagonist if he is a new member. He notices something. He sees a brown-haired girl behind the protagonist and thought that in front of him were Red Eyes and Krista. He says that someone mentioned a low-ranking mage. He reports that he was mistaken because he has a habit of expressing his thoughts out loud. He adds that as a student of one of the grade 8 schools, he was on his way to greet the noble Lord Ryan. He looks the protagonist in the face and tells him that he seems to have just mentioned a magical duel. With a malicious smile, he asks the protagonist if he heard correctly. The main character tells him that he heard correctly, and since he is so eager for battle, he will arrange a duel for him. Logan laughs and asks the protagonist if he really thinks he can defeat someone like Logan, and then asks if he is serious. The main character, with a smile on his face, asks the gray-haired guy if he is really afraid and maybe he should give in to him. He adds how about he won't use combat magic. Krista has a surprised expression on her face. The main character asks Logan if this is still not enough. He adds that he will then only use the 3 spells developed by this club. The gray-haired guy asks the protagonist if he is serious. The main character closes his eyes and says that he doesn't think he will lose. Logan laughs loudly and shouts that this is not just a failure, but a complete failure. A bead of sweat runs down the brown-haired girl's cheek. The gray-haired guy covers his mouth and says that he was wrong again, and then asks Lord Ryan if he knows that it takes 3 days to approve membership, so at this point it's just a personal challenge. The main character, with a serious expression on his face, tells Logan to get down to business. The gray-haired guy points his hand at the guy with glasses and says that if Lord Ryan wins, he will surrender, and if troublemakers appear, he will drive them away himself. He says with a creepy expression that if he wins, they will file for expulsion from Delayton. He says with a smile on his face that the reason will be, after meeting Logan from Chehak School, he felt an insurmountable barrier. Krista puts her hands to the side. She asks the bully if he is joking and will he really just give up the club. The bully tells the girl that strangers should shut up. The main character tells the brown-haired girl to stay out of this. The girl screams and asks the protagonist if he understands what is happening. The rivals look at each other and the protagonist asks what else he needs to understand, and then declares that he will win anyway. The main character informs his opponent that he can choose the time and date himself, because he is ready at any time. A drop of sweat runs down the cheek of a guy with glasses. Logan laughs and asks the protagonist if this means he accepts the terms. He passes by the main character and tells him that he will invite the professor as a judge. As the gray-haired guy leaves, he says that this time they really caught a big fish, and then adds that the elders will be pleased. Krista looks at the protagonist. The bully says with a gloating smile on his face that it's going to be a fantastic day. Krista stands silently. She asks the protagonist if he really forgot about his position here, since he got involved in a magic duel. The main character takes out a book from the bookshelf. The protagonist says that he is a freshman at Delayton University, and the girl says that the protagonist should stop making jokes. The main character puts the book back. Krista looks at the protagonist with a dissatisfied expression. She turns around and leaves, and then tells the protagonist that he is free to do whatever he wants. The main character takes out a green book and asks why she is angry. The guy in the black shirt takes off his glasses and says that what the protagonist did is something logically incomprehensible. He adds that the descendants of a magical family never engage in magical duels. The main character took a closer look at the ring of the guy with glasses and noticed a dragon there with its wings spread, and then noticed that he was a sophomore. The main character asks the sophomore why. The guy with glasses replies that this is because you lose too much compared to what you gain. He touches his cheek and then says that to be honest, he is more confused than grateful, and then asks the protagonist why he helped. The main character stands opposite the guy with glasses and says that it's not that he was going to help, but admits that it was done for a task. The second year says he is grateful, but it seems that Lord Ryan is underestimating Logan. The gray-haired guy walks near black images of people. The main character asks if this is true and if he is really that impressive. The guy with glasses says that the gray-haired guy is a king-type mage and is especially strong against general mages who specialize in long-range magic. Logan punches a magician with a staff in his hand. The guy with glasses adds that, thanks to his strong physical abilities and character, he has already participated in several magic duels. He reports that his win rate is over 90%. Beneath the gray-haired guy lies his defeated opponent. The guy with glasses sits on a chair and tells the protagonist that he got involved in a very reckless adventure, then blames himself for the fact that this happened because he behaved carelessly. The main character listens to the words of the sophomore with a calm expression on his face. The guy with the glasses says he may have exaggerated when he argued with Logan, but to be honest, it's not that great of a club. The sophomore wipes his glasses and says that he grew up in the village. He adds that the villagers collected money to pay for his university education and he decided to repay them in his own small way to make the village a better place. The villagers say goodbye to the sophomore. The guy with glasses raises his hand up as a sign of farewell. He says with a smile on his face that this is why he joined this club and began to study magic. But everything did not go as planned, and over time the anxiety and worry only intensified. He adds that he clung to it for personal reasons, but in the end he achieved nothing. He asks the main character if this is a pity. The protagonists seem to glow. The guy with glasses says that it seems like it was God's will that he quit. He closes his eyes with a smile on his face and puts his hand to his cheek, and then says that he is very sorry and therefore he will participate in a magic duel. The main character asks what's so pathetic about this. The sophomore removes his hand from his cheek. The main character looks at the guy with a serious expression on his face. He puts the book on the shelf and says that he agreed to the magic duel. He asks if he can borrow some books related to the magic of the club, because he needs to familiarize himself with them for the duel. The main character leaves and says that he will return them when the duel is over. The sophomore wants to stop the protagonist. The main character asks him if he knows why the Archmage Rin began to practice magic. The guy with glasses asks why. The main character stands at the entrance and replies that this happened because of the desire to survive. He adds that everyone starts for personal reasons. Sunlight illuminates the building of the educational institution. The main character passes by other students and thought that rumors had already spread. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's cheek. He thought this was becoming a big problem. Someone shouts the name Ryan in a female voice, which causes the protagonist to get scared. The main character turns back. Tired, Alin tells the protagonist that she has finally found him and asks how he is doing. The main character notices that this is Aunt Alin. The aunt punches the protagonist in the face and tells him to shut up. She shouts to the protagonist that she has been sleepy lately, but thanks to him, she is now fully awake. Alin spits out the tea because she was told that the genius of the Ludwig family is participating in a magic duel. She asks the protagonist against Logan from the 8 main schools if he will fight. The aunt puts her fist to the protagonist and asks if everyone in the school is in shock, and then adds that she probably misheard. The main character answers his aunt that this is true. Alin says that their cute little nephew is causing quite a stir, and it looks like she needs to drink some liquor today. The main character screams that his head is going to split. Alin releases the protagonist and tells him that if Logan hits him, it will be several times more painful than now. She asks him what he was thinking and calls him a fool. Alin stopped inside. The main character asks his aunt if she is worried, after which she makes a dissatisfied expression on her face. The aunt pokes her index finger at the protagonist and shouts at him that she really looks like a pathetic aunt who is worried and asks about a guy like him. She pushes the protagonist away with her finger and shouts at him that he will come to his senses only after receiving a good thrashing from Logan. The aunt leaves the protagonist. The main character lowered his gaze and apologizes to his aunt, and then says that he didn't know that he shouldn't do this. He adds that he assures that this will not disgrace their family. Alin tells the protagonist that despite his intentions, this has already become a matter of family honor. She puts her hand to the side and tells the main character that due to his rash actions, in the worst case it could end in expulsion. But everything is fine. She tells the main character that she was very annoyed by those who laughed at him as a worthless brat. The main character removes his hand from his face. The aunt points her finger at the protagonist and with a smile on her face shouts at him that since he started this, he needs to trample them properly when he leaves with victory. She shouts that the name Ludwig is on the shoulders of the protagonist and he needs to make sure that others cannot even think about rising to his level. The main character listens carefully to the words of his aunt. Lin asks the protagonist to show them a worthy lesson. The main character smiles a little. The sun is shining brightly in the sky. The protagonist stands opposite Logan in the middle of the amphitheater. The bully is wearing shorts and has taken off his white shirt. The gray-haired guy smiles smugly. The main character thought that this was his intention from the very beginning. The protagonist looks at the enemy with a serious expression on his face. One of the students asks what is happening. Another student asks why it's so noisy. Students are running somewhere. Students run to the amphitheater. Someone announces that the worthless aristocrat and the jock from Chehak are entering into a fight. The main character stands opposite his opponent. Many spectators gathered around. Owen watches with his arms crossed. Caroline asks the bearded man who will win. Logan, who is from the same school as Owen, or Ryan, his student. The bearded man says that status, pedigree, or education do not matter to him. He says that he will simply support the one who is stronger. A judge appears between the protagonist and the gray-haired guy. Caroline tells Owen that she knew he thought so. A brown-haired man in a black vest says that he is Tion, the judge of this magical duel. He reveals that since this magical duel is officially sanctioned by the school, the loser must fulfill the winner's conditions set by the school. Logan smiles maliciously. The protagonist looks at the opponent with a calm expression on his face. The judge asks the applicants to step forward. The gray-haired guy takes off his white cloak and goes to the protagonist. His chest is bandaged. The main character watches his opponent. One of the spectators reports that it looks like he is prepared. Another spectator asks if this is too much against the failed nobleman. Another viewer reports that he will be difficult to defeat. Logan stops in his tracks. Krista in a green hood silently watches. Gertrude appears next to her, who tells her what it means. She was here after all. The brown-haired girl is frightened by the sudden appearance of a girl. She says with a nervous smile that she didn't come here because she was worried. She adds that she came to enjoy how this guy is beaten. The pink-haired girl replies that she thought so. Caroline thought with a thoughtful look that apprentice mages have a very long casting time, so mages who can immediately engage in melee pose a threat. She wonders how the protagonist is going to fight him. The main character has taken out something and is twirling it in his hand. The blonde has a surprised expression on her face. Spectators watch what is happening with interest. The main character holds a broom in his hand. Logan tells the main character that he thought he was holding some kind of wooden stick, but it was metal. He took a closer look at the protagonist's broom. The audience begins to laugh at what is happening. One of the spectators shouts that it is a broom. Another viewer asks the protagonist if he really went out to clean up. Owen and Caroline watch with concern on their faces. Krista covers her face with her hand, and the pink-haired girl opens her eyes wide. One of the spectators shouts that the noble genius is fighting with a broom. The judge asks what it is. The main character shows the broom and says that he took it from the library, and then adds that fortunately, the cleaning has just finished. The judge asks the protagonist if he is going to use it for a magical duel, and the main character asks if this is really forbidden. The judge answers that of course not. Logan closes his eyes and sighs. He spreads his arms to the sides and asks the protagonist if he is really asking for leniency. He tells the protagonist that he was so arrogant, and then asks if the protagonist is going to destroy everything in his path. He asks the protagonist to end this and not show them this shameful spectacle again. The protagonist scratches his head. He opens his mouth and begins to speak. He tells the gray-haired guy that it has always been like this since he came to the university. He says that from the elder's point of view, it is truly unfortunate. Logan asks the protagonist which elder he means. The gray-haired guy asks why young people nowadays are so good at empty conversations, because the protagonist is not a witch sending curses. The main character with a broom on his shoulder asks his opponent since when did magicians begin to win with words. The main character and his rival approach each other. The judge asks them to step back. Tion closes his eyes and says that he will make one last statement before the duel. He says that if Logan loses, he will serve as a security guard at the local magical development club until graduation. A drop of sweat runs down the cheek of a guy with glasses. The judge adds that if Ryan loses, he will be expelled from Delayton. Krista and Gertrude watch with worry on their faces. The judge adds that there can be no objections to the decision, and then asks the students if they agree. The protagonist and Logan both say yes. Tion puts his hand forward and creates a magical pentagon, and then tells the duel participants to move away. He reports that the duel will begin in 10 seconds. The main character puts his broom forward, and Logan combines his hands. A clock appears from the pentagon, counting down. One of the spectators exclaims that it is high time to start. Another spectator exclaims that it's time to hurry up. The girl with violet eyes, with concern on her face, hears shouts from the duel. She sees students in the corridor going somewhere. She asks Professor Alin if she would like to watch and adds that she can just go and she will sort out the rest. The protagonist Aunt says that she doesn't want to and writes something on paper. The purple-haired girl tells Alin that she is so calm despite the fact that her nephew is facing a serious test. Alin, with a dissatisfied expression on her face, asks the purple-haired girl if she really wants to say that she cannot remain calm. The purple-haired girl replies that that's not what she meant. Alin looks out the window, and mentally turning to her brother, she thought that Ryan could be a sage. The protagonist Aunt smiles. Logan clutches the bandages on his chest and says that there is no need to watch, because the result is already a foregone conclusion. The main character with a serious expression on his face holds a broom in his hand. The count reaches 1. Tion announces the start of the duel. He puts his hand forward. Logan rips off his bandages and screams to watch carefully, because once he is eliminated, he will no longer have the opportunity to see all this. The main character pulled the broom behind his back. The gray-haired guy materializes 3 yellow squares and shouts that this is a secret technique of the Chehak school, strengthening the body. Gertrude, with flushed cheeks, says that it looks like he's going to finish it all in one go. Green lines appear on the gray-haired guy's body. Hubert wondered if his technique was activation speed. He adds that a small mistake can lead to broken bones or rupture of internal organs. Caroline thought it was no surprise that he was considered one of the great Chehak graduates. The main character holds a broom in 2 hands. He closes his eyes. Logan smiles and shouts that he will finish this in 10 seconds. The protagonist sighs. The gray-haired guy makes a dash towards the protagonist. Krista and Gertrude watch what is happening with concern on their faces. The main character stands in one place waiting for the enemy. Hubert watches closely what is happening. The bully has almost reached the protagonist and is about to punch him. He thought that the protagonist couldn't even move and the result would have been the same even if he could. A bright glow emanates from his fist. Logan thought that strengthened body was a spell that both attacked and protected. It creates a wall of magical force on the surface of the body for protection and explodes magic at the point of impact to damage the opponent. The main character stands with his eyes closed. The gray-haired guy makes a blow and thought that it was impossible to stop it and he would end the duel with one blow. He adds that he will break this annoying face. The broom heads towards the gray-haired guy's fist. The main character repels an opponent's blow with a broom. Logan's eyes widen in surprise. The main character swings a broom. A line of red energy emanates from his eye. He hits his opponent's stomach with a broom. Logan flies far towards the sun. The guy with glasses watches what is happening with surprise on his face. Krista and Gertrude also have surprised faces. Hubert is also surprised. Caroline and Owen open their eyes wide in surprise. Logan falls to the ground. The bearded professor thought that this was really the staff technique of the Osiris school. He thought that 300 years ago, this amazing achievement had elevated the Osiris school to the rank of one of the 8 major schools. He adds that this is a technique developed by the great magician Rin. The main character sighs with a broom in his hands. The main character thought that even magicians need strength to engage in close combat. He imagines Lista hitting the protagonist with a sword. The main character thought that this is why they say that he created this technique with the help of the hero Lista. A defeated Rin lies in front of Lista. Logan wonders how the heir to the Ludwig family mastered this technique. He lands on the ground. Caroline silently watches what is happening. The protagonist's broom is enveloped in red energy. The blonde thought that the broom was not broken yet. She thinks that if he had hit the body, surrounded by bodily reinforcement, with just a cleaning broom, it would have shattered. A bead of sweat runs down her cheek. She thought that the main character really strengthened her strength with the help of magic, and then says that this is strong control. The main character twirls his staff over himself and wonders who he really is. He places the broom on his shoulder and sighs. Lots of residents scream out of admiration. Logan dropped one knee. Someone from the audience shouts that Logan was simply thrown out. The main character looks carefully at the gray-haired guy. The gray-haired guy coughs saliva and wonders what it was. Logan rests his hands on the ground and wonders if the strengthening of his body has been broken by the broom used by the useless noble brat. His eyes are red. The main character says that more than 10 seconds have passed and is this not the end yet? He reports that it is no fun to torment a promising junior student. Logan made an angry expression on his face. The main character spins the broom and says that he will finish it in 6 seconds. He gets into a fighting stance and asks the gray-haired guy to attack. The bright sun illuminates the battlefield. The main character pulled the broom behind his back. Logan wipes his face and thought that the protagonist was showing off just because he struck. He clenched his teeth. Logan hits a ground kick. It destroyed the floor underneath him. The floor under the protagonist also collapses. Many cracks appear on the ground. Stones rise into the air. Krista and Gertrude watch what is happening with concern on their faces. Around Logan, many rocks rise into the air. A drop of sweat runs down Hubert's cheek. The earth is becoming more and more deformed. The gray-haired guy jumped off the ground. The main character holds a broom in both hands with an angry look. Logan hits one of the rocks with his fist. The protagonist beats the stone with his broom. He noticed something. He does not see his opponent in front of him. The main character turns back. He touches the ground with the hard end of the broom and a blue circle appears. Another stone flies at the protagonist. The main character beats off a stone with his broom. Logan jumps on top of the protagonist and swings his leg at him. He makes a powerful blow. The guy with glasses opens his mouth in surprise. Someone's silhouette is visible in the smoke. The gray-haired guy clenched his teeth. He looks down and notices that his legs have been sucked underground. The main character says that he heard that this magical remedy is used to plow fields. Logan has a surprised expression on his face. He looks up with his eyes wide open. The main character tries to remember what it was called, and then says that in any case, it is a 1-star spell. A huge stone mountain appeared in front of Logan. The main character stands on top of a large mountain and says that this is a spell that creates a temporary dam during a flood. It is a 2-star spell. With a smile on his face, he asks Logan how he likes these spells and whether they are useful. Right. Many spectators are animatedly discussing what is happening. The two girls are fascinated by what is happening, and the bald man behind them makes a worried expression. Owen thought with a small smile on his face that by standing on a platform of broken rocks, providing himself with visibility and distance, the strategy of neutralizing Logan's skills was strong in close combat. He adds that it's impressive how the protagonist anticipated the attack and turned the ground into mud, tying his legs. The gray-haired guy tries to move, but cannot. The bearded professor thought that, moreover, casting 2 necessary spells almost simultaneously was impressive. Caroline thought who would have thought that this was a mental calculation. The main character looks at his opponent with a serious expression. Owen says that it will all end now, and Caroline replies that this is how it is. Logan grits his teeth in anger, and a bead of sweat runs down his left cheek. The main character throws his broom straight down. The bearded professor and the blonde have shocked expressions on their faces. The broom flies straight at the gray-haired guy. Hubert and Krista and Gertrude have the same shocked expressions on their faces. The gray-haired guy looks up with surprise on his face. A brown-haired girl asks the protagonist what he is doing and calls him stupid, as a bead of sweat runs down her cheek. The pink-haired girl also watches what is happening with surprise on her face. She screams at the protagonist that he should just cast one long-range spell, and it will all be over. Logan clenches his hand into a fist and swings it. Red, crackling energy emanates from his feet. The gray-haired guy clenches his hand into a fist and it begins to glow brightly. The broom almost landed. The main character watches the broom with a stern expression. The opponent also looks at the broom with his reddened eyes. The broom has landed on the ground, and the protagonist's opponent makes a lightning-fast jump in his direction. Krista has a surprised expression on her face. The main character stands with a calm expression on his face. The guy with glasses opens his mouth in surprise. Logan almost jumped to the protagonist and points a glowing fist at him. The roots of the tree envelop the bully's hand and it stops a few centimeters from his face. Logan opens his eyes wide in surprise. The roots completely envelop the bully's body and hamper his movements. Many roots grew from the place where the broom fell. Krista and Gertrude open their mouths in surprise. The main character says that this is a spell that breathes life into dead plants. The guy with glasses got his glasses askew. The main character says that his action lasts 10 seconds. A bead of sweat runs down Logan's cheek and he closes his left eye. The protagonist adds that this spell can be used like this. Broom branches stick out from the root. The bully thought that it was really a broom. He gritted his teeth because he was angry and sweat was dripping down his face. The main character broke off a piece of the root and says that, as promised, he used only 3 spells. He looks at his opponent, who has an angry expression on his face. The main character with a stern look asks his opponent to finish this.